Chapter 231. It's actually a scholar. Under the moonlight, they could vaguely see the leader's figure. One of them immediately laughed. "Scholar, are you also here to kill that Lu Rui?" The man laughed a few times and said mockingly, "What's the point of a good scholar learning to fight and kill? Why don't you go home and study for a few more years?" Tonight's operation, everyone actually had a relaxed attitude. At this moment, when they heard the man mocking the scholar for overestimating himself, they immediately roared with laughter. As for the others, they didn't think too much about it. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. What else could it be if it wasn't for that woman? Could it be that all of you heroes are here to take that woman's life? The scholar was stunned. After regaining his senses, he cupped his fists and said to the man in front of him, "Hee, that woman's martial arts are powerful. If you are afraid, why don't you come with us? When we catch her, you can slash her a few times to vent your anger." The man in front of him didn't put the scholar in his eyes, but the three men behind him seemed to have a strong aura. They were worth roping in. A look of pleasant surprise appeared on the scholar's face, and he hurriedly said, "In that case, I'll have to thank this hero. That woman killed my brother, and she and I are absolutely irreconcilable enemies. If I can take revenge today, I'll definitely have to thank all of you heroes. You're too polite." The man laughed and reached out to pat the scholar's shoulder. The scholar easily dodged to the side. The man's face revealed a surprised expression. This scholar's words revealed a trace of a bandit's aura, and his movements were abnormally agile. He didn't look like a weak scholar at all. This is a bit interesting. Thinking that he had underestimated the scholar before, the man praised him. He didn't believe it and grabbed the scholar's shoulder. This time, he used a bit more strength than before. The scholar raised his hand to block, but the man suddenly felt a strange force coming from his wrist. The next moment, the scholar grabbed his wrist and pulled, causing his body to involuntarily take a step forward. The young scholar clearly held back and didn't use much strength. The man steadied himself, and the strange look in his eyes became even stronger. He cupped his fists and said, "May I ask which hero of the Lulan forest you are?" Since he had such skills, he shouldn't be a nobody in the Jianghu. "I don't deserve to be called a hero." He had used up almost all of his strength in that attack just now. The scholar calmed himself down and cupped his fists as he replied, "I've only killed a few people. I'm indebted to the heroes of the forest for their favor, so I've been given the nickname, Deadly Scholar, Life-Stealing Scholar." For a moment, the burly man could not recall if there was such a person in the Jianghu. At this moment, the people in front of him had already walked more than 10 steps. Without thinking too much, he cupped his fists and said, "So you are the fatal bookworm. It's an honor to meet you." The corner of the scholar's mouth twitched. At this moment, the man urged, "It's getting late. Let's leave quickly." "That's good." The young scholar seemed to be eager to take the woman's life as well. He turned around and gestured to the three burly men behind him. The three of them looked at each other and nodded. They tightened the bulging bags on their backs and followed. As the few of them followed behind, they were questioned a little. Although they were not familiar with the bandit name of the deadly bookworm, they were not unfamiliar with it either. After all, most of the people in the forest had the same style of naming themselves. They had heard of names like Death Stealing Life, Butcher King of Hell, and they were too lazy to differentiate between them. Seeing that the scholar was talking about killing people so casually, it did not seem like he was faking it. Not long after, they began to treat him as one of their own. Brother Zhou said that the woman is so beautiful that it would be a pity to kill her just like that. "If you ask me, why don't we let our brothers have some fun after we catch her later? I'd like to see how she's different from ordinary women. Let's be careful, lest we fail miserably and lose our precious lives." As the crowd discussed openly, there was not a single light in the stronghold a mile away. It was exceptionally quiet. "That's strange, where did everyone go?" A figure snuck into the stronghold silently. He wanted to capture someone and interrogate them about the woman's residence, but after going through a few courtyards, he did not see a single person. Could it be that the woman had already gotten wind of it and escaped first? Or did someone beat me to it? He had a puzzled look on his face. There were many heroes who targeted the woman, and he thought that he was fast enough. He did not expect that he was still one step too late. With that thought in mind, he had already climbed up another wall like a nimble monkey. When he entered the courtyard, he finally saw the lights in the house through the window. Someone's here. A hint of joy appeared on his face. Just as he was about to make a move, he heard a creak and the door opened. A hunched figure walked out from inside. The person was stunned for a moment before he immediately pounced on him. Under the moonlight, the cold edge of his blade gleamed, and a chilling voice could be heard. "Old man, where is that Lu Rui? Answer me honestly and I'll spare your life." Bang! The skinny man punched the figure in black back. When the other party swung the weapon in his hand again, the skinny man suddenly sped up and punched the man's neck. With a crack, the man's eyeballs looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. His neck tilted and he fell to the ground, no longer breathing. "That's the fifth one." He threw the man's body to the side. There were several figures lying on the ground. After a muffled sound, a black figure was thrown out from the courtyard wall, and there was another body on the ground. "The sixth one," he murmured, wiped the blood from his arm, and retreated into the courtyard wall. There were many people in the courtyard. When he walked in, a woman saw his arm and immediately helped him to the side to bandage the wound. A moment of carelessness, a moment of carelessness. When a few men walked over, he smiled awkwardly and said with some embarrassment, "Why are you here?" The man in the lead looked at him and asked with a frown. "The few of them are enough to guard the back. Moreover, the second young mistress is there too." The man smiled and said, "If those guys want to come in, they can only walk in front. I'm here to take a look. With the young mistress here, there's nothing to worry about here." The man's expression was rather relaxed. During the day, he had indeed been nervous for a while, but after seeing the scene just now, he had completely dispelled his worries. "They're here." Another figure pushed the door open and said in a low voice. The crowd looked at each other, took their weapons, and when they walked out, the figure with the sword was already walking in the direction of the village's entrance. "They're here." The group of more than 10 people stopped in front of the village in the mountains. Among the crowd, a man saw the young man with the bandit nickname, Deadly Scholar, and sighed. The expression on his face was rather complicated. "Hee, don't be anxious. In a while, your brother's revenge will be avenged." The man laughed and said. In the darkness of the night, more than 10 figures walked over. The night was very bright, and the crowd had good eyesight. They saw the young woman walking in front at a glance. "It's her. She's Lu Rui. What are they trying to do? Do they think that they can fight against us with just a few people?" The crowd began to speak. Bone-paring knife, Zhu Tufu, Death Rush, Cui Yen, the burly man with the surname Zhou, and the third lady narrowed their eyes. Their faces were filled with vigilance as they held their weapons in their hands. That woman knew that they were coming, but she was not afraid at all. There must be a trap, and they could not let their guard down. "Heroes, I have an irreconcilable feud with that woman. If I don't kill her with my own hands, I'm afraid I won't be able to think straight. Let us go and meet her first." All of a sudden, a voice came from the back of the crowd. Everyone saw the deadly bookworm glaring at the figure in front of him. His face was contorted and filled with hatred. A few of the men beside him placed the bags on their backs on the ground, drew their weapons, and charged forward. This sudden scene caused everyone to be slightly startled. For him to be this impatient, it would appear that there was some sort of blood feud between the life-stealing scholar and Lu Rui. Including Zhu Tufu and the others, no one stopped him. They were glad that someone was willing to take the lead and test the woman's strength. It was a good opportunity to see if the woman was up to no good. The few of them quickly rushed to the woman's side, but they did not see the clash of swords and weapons that they had expected. While they were puzzled, one of them suddenly exclaimed, "What's that sound?" Buzz, a faint sound could be heard faintly in the crowd's ears. Chapter 232. Buzz, the sound was soft, so soft that it was almost inaudible. However, these people were not ordinary people. Be it their eyesight or hearing, they were better than ordinary people. The moment the man spoke, the people around him immediately followed the source of the sound and looked down at the ground. The sound came from the 3 bundles on the ground. The deadly bookworms men put them down just now. Everyone's attention was on the people in front of them just now, so not many people knew what the 3 men were doing behind the crowd. At this moment, one of them used his weapon to open the bundles and finally revealed the things inside. Although the moonlight was still bright, there were many people around and the ground was dark. The few people who surrounded them could only see a few black things that looked like clay pots. The sparks of fire flickered and went into the fist-sized black things. "What the hell is this?" one of them mumbled and scratched his head, confused. "What's going on inside?" A few voices came from the outside. The 3 men had placed the bundles right in the middle of the crowd. At this moment, more than 10 people were surrounding them and watching. The people outside had no idea what was going on, and their voices were filled with shock and doubt. "Husband, Uncle Fong, you guys." The calm expression on Lu Rui's pretty face disappeared instantly. Seeing Li Yi and Fong running over from the crowd, her expression changed drastically. "I'll deal with you later." There was still a faint pain at the back of her neck. Li Yi glared at her. While Lu Rui was still in a daze, he pushed her to the ground and rolled to a place not far away that was slightly lower than the ground. At the moment when Li Yi pounced on her, Lu Rui's body had already subconsciously prepared for it. However, she did not resist and allowed him to push her to the ground. "Get down." Old Fong and the other 2 men did not remain idle either. With a loud shout, they spread their arms wide and pounced on the remaining men. The men were not prepared for their own people. Caught off guard, they were suddenly pounced on and rolled to a spot not far from Li Yi's side like a gourd. One of the men dodged and did not fall to the ground. Old Fong did a somersault and kicked the man's calf. The man fell to the ground and was dragged over by Old Fong. Not only did the men not react to the sudden turn of events, but the dozens of people from the greenwood forest opposite them were also dumbfounded. For a moment, they could not figure out whether the deadly bookworm was a friend or a foe. Were they in cahoots with Lu Rui, or had the scholar used some sorcery to immobilize Lu Rui and the others and subdued them? However, none of this mattered now. What mattered was that this was a good opportunity for them. Zhu Tufu and the others gripped their weapons tightly in their hands and ran toward them. Not far away, Li Yi was lying on the ground with a puzzled look on his face. "That's not right. Why isn't there any sound? Is the fuse too long?" Just as this thought appeared in their minds, a bright light flashed before their eyes. An earth-shattering sound suddenly exploded in front of them. With this earth-shattering sound, the ground beneath them shook a few times. Even though Fong and the others had seen the power of a miniature version of gunpowder and were mentally prepared for it, they were still frightened by the sound just now. He got up and looked in that direction. The huge firework hadn't had time to dissipate yet. Cold sweat dripped down from the foreheads of the 3 of them. When they thought about how they were able to stand here unscathed after carrying such a thing on their backs, the 3 of them immediately felt as if they had just survived a disaster. If it had exploded on their backs, not even a complete corpse would have been left behind. Hubby. Even though Lu Rui was a grandmaster, she could not maintain her composure at this moment. She looked at Li Yi in horror. She could not imagine that he was the one who had caused such a commotion. If they were in such a state, the other men were even worse off. Their minds were blank and their ears were buzzing. Because they were lying on the ground, they did not see what had happened in front of them. However, the earth-shattering sound made them feel weak in the knees and unable to stand up. At the same time, the old people, women, and children who were left behind gathered in a small courtyard at the back of the stockade village. Lu Rui and a few men were standing guard around the courtyard. At some point, they all raised their heads at the same time and looked forward. What's going on? The men's bodies trembled as a look of shock appeared on their faces. I'll go and have a look. Lu Rui gritted her teeth and said. She rushed towards the direction of the sound. In a small courtyard, a shocked old face peeked out from behind the door. What's going on? Is there thunder? Looking up at the sky, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The shock on the old face was even more intense. On the mountain road from the foot of the mountain to Willow Leaf Village, two groups of people on horses were galloping up. At night, the mountain road was rugged and difficult to travel. The people on horses were holding torches and the horses were not fast. When they encountered dangerous places, they could only lead the horses forward. We're almost there. Everyone, hurry up. The leader of the guards of Prince Ning Mansion said with a sullen face. This time, the crown prince had given a strict order to protect the safety of Li Li and his family. If they were late and made a big mistake, they would not be able to explain it to the crown prince when they returned. Half a mile ahead of them, the old woman led more than 10 masters from the palace. Their speed was even faster than the people on horses. A half-step grandmaster and a first-class master. If they have other companions, it shouldn't be difficult to deal with them for a while. The old woman murmured to herself and urged them. When she raised her head, they could vaguely see the village in the dark. Boom! At this moment, a bright light shot up to the sky. The old woman's body shook violently and she suddenly stopped moving. Although they did not receive her order, the dozen figures also stopped moving. Looking at the village in front of them that had returned to silence and darkness, they were shocked and bewildered. Behind them, the horses neighed. The guards of Prince Ning Mansion dismounted one after another. They comforted the frightened horses and looked ahead with frightened eyes. That bright light and loud noise just now. What was that? In front of the village, there were dozens of heroes of the underworld. Less than 10 of them were still standing where they were. After the 3 bags exploded in the crowd, more than 10 people in the middle were instantly thrown to the ground. Not a single body was intact. Even the people on the periphery were holding a certain part of their body and wailing in pain. The metal shrapnel mixed in with the explosives was enough to turn a human body into a sieve at the moment of the explosion. The unlucky ones were hit in a vital part and immediately stopped breathing. The lucky ones were standing a little further away and were only affected by the blast. At this moment, they were so scared that they collapsed to the ground. They were scared half to death by the strange scene just now. The few people who had rushed more than 10 steps with Zhu Tufu were the luckiest. Only one man fell to the ground, holding his bleeding throat. The rest of the people turned to look at the place where they had been standing. At this moment, it had become a hell filled with broken limbs. The weapons in their hands fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 233. Black gunpowder was highly sensitive and easily flammable. It could be ignited with just a small spark, and it was extremely destructive. When a unit of gunpowder was ignited, its temperature could reach more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, and its volume could expand nearly 10,000 times, causing a violent explosion. These descriptions were what Li Yi had read from books. If the gunpowder was mixed with iron pieces, when it exploded, the power would be no less than that of a bullet, and it could easily penetrate a human body. Of course, the books in the library would not describe these things. This kind of sinister method was something Li Yi had learned from a transmigration novel. Time was tight, and Li Yi did not have the time to do a lot of experiments. After finding the formula of gunpowder from a book in a remote corner, he and Fong and the other 2 immediately started to prepare it. Fortunately, the process was smooth. This divine tool that had been verified by tens of thousands of transmigrators showed its power for the first time in this world. A huge pit was blasted on the ground. Within a radius of 10 feet from the center of the pit, there was no one alive, and there were countless broken limbs. The people in the forest who were further away from the center and standing on the periphery were not directly affected by the explosion. However, the bullet-like iron pieces and iron nails had scratched them, and even if the damage was not fatal, it was enough to make them lose their fighting power. Of course, there were people who were lucky enough to survive, but after personally experiencing the scene just now, the companions who were talking and laughing around them were now corpses on the ground, and the surroundings were like hell. How many people could still muster up the courage? Devil, he's a devil. A few tall men who were lucky enough to not be injured had pale faces, and their bodies were shaking like a sieve. A fishy smell quickly spread from their lower bodies. Under that kind of heavenly might, the heroes of the underworld and the martial arts masters were no different from ordinary people. The deadly scholar. Zhu Tufu's shiny head still had a piece of colorful intestine hanging on it. It had flown over from behind when the explosion just now. His expression was incomparably savage, and his eyes almost split apart from rage. The battle hadn't even started, yet the several tens of men he'd brought with him were almost completely annihilated, and the source of all this was actually the scholar that he'd never looked straight at from the beginning until the end. Damn it, he's a spy sent by that woman. The burly man surnamed Zhou's expression was extremely gloomy. He had never expected that they would be defeated by such a person. At this time, the scholar had already stood up several zhang away. Looking at the few figures standing in front of him, there was a black lump on the ground, and there was a bloody lump by his feet that he did not know what it was. Li Yi could not help but feel his stomach churn. In both of his lives, the only person who had died by his hand was Wu Ying. That sound just now was probably equivalent to 10 lifetimes of his. As a person with a modern soul, killing was still a huge psychological burden for him. But just like the time when he was kidnapped by Wu Ying, it was either kill or be killed. This was a very simple question. Living in such an era, you can be a hero of the underworld, and I can be a lazy county magistrate. No one has it easy, so why make things difficult for each other? Li Yi was also helpless. Gunpowder was a very dangerous thing to both himself and others. If he was not careful, he might lose his life before he could blow up others. His goal was actually very low. He just wanted to live well, and the people around him to live well. Was there anything lower than living? But some people just could not bear to see others live well. What Jianghu, what martial arts world, what heroes of the underworld, if they did not want others to live, then they should all die. The mountains will never change, and the rivers will always flow. Lu Rui, deadly scholar, I'll come back for your lives in the future. Zhu Tufu held 2 boning knives in his hands. He really wanted to rush over and chop the man and woman into pieces to vent his anger, but he could only forcibly suppress this thought. In a short moment, the strength of both sides had been reversed. Apart from the 4 of them who were not injured, the rest of the people were either dead or injured. Those who were not dead or injured had long been scared out of their wits. Even if they were extremely unwilling, they could only retreat first and think about it at length. With a stamp of his foot, he took the lead and rushed into the darkness behind him. There's no need for that. Just as he was about to rush out of the stockade, a cold voice came from behind. How could it be? When Zhu Tufu turned around, he only saw a flash of sword light in front of him. Before he could lift the boning knife in his hand, a line of blood appeared on his forehead. Bang! When Zhu Tufu's body fell to the ground, the faces of the gloomy man, the burly man surnamed Zhou, and the third lady changed dramatically. One move, only one move. Zhu Tufu did not even have the time to react. Such speed, such strength. When the woman turned around to look at the 3 of them, their hands were tightly gripping their weapons, but they were shocked to find that the thin figure was just standing there casually. To them, it was like an insurmountable mountain. There was no flaw. There was only one possibility that could make them feel this way. Almost instantly, Cui Yan and the third lady's eyes suddenly turned to the burly man surnamed Zhou. Grandmaster, this woman was a grandmaster. At this moment, the 2 of them even wanted to kill the burly man surnamed Zhou. Who on earth gave him the courage to summon the heroes of the underworld in such a high-profile manner to take the head of a grandmaster? Even without the earth-shattering commotion just now, with just the few of them leading a group of weaklings against a grandmaster who was going all out, even if they could kill him, not many of them would be able to return alive. Moreover, the other party wasn't alone. Not to mention the dozens of people with strong auras around her, just the deadly scholar alone was enough to send them all to hell before they could see the person in question. Revenge? Senior Han's disciple? Squire Zhao's reward? All of them could go to hell. At this moment, the most important thing was to stay alive. Third lady's speed was the fastest. Before Cui Yan and the man surnamed Zhou could react, she had already rushed down the mountain. The sudden appearance of more than 10 silhouettes made her extremely happy. If these people could entangle that woman, it wouldn't be difficult for her to escape tonight. Just as she was about to escape to the side, a skinny hand grabbed her neck in the darkness. "Move again and I'll break your neck." The hoarse voice of the old woman rang out. More figures surrounded her from behind. Further away, the sound of horses' hooves could be heard amidst the flames and flames. By the time the old woman forced Third Lady's way by the neck, the shadowy man and the burly man surnamed Zhou had already gathered more than 10 people who could still stand. As for their companions who were groaning on the ground with broken limbs and could not even stand, they were no longer in the scope of their consideration. There was a grandmaster blocking their way, and the people behind them were obviously enemies. After some consideration, they felt that if they fought with the people behind them, they might have a chance of survival. With just a few of them, they would definitely die if they went up against a grandmaster. Kill. The shadowy man and the burly man surnamed Zhou looked at each other, then led the remaining people and charged towards the back. Stop them, capture them alive. The old woman snorted coldly. More than 10 figures silently drew their weapons. Chapter 234. The people that the old woman brought were all masters from the palace. They were sent from the palace to protect Her Highness. If they couldn't even stop a few frightened mobs, they didn't need to follow the princess after they went back. They should just go and do whatever they wanted to do. The battle ended very quickly. It was a completely one-sided situation. Only the shadowy man and the man surnamed Zhou held on for 3 more seconds. The next moment, several knives were put on their necks at the same time. The old woman knocked out the third lady and handed her over to her subordinates. She planned to come and ask about the situation. After taking 2 steps, she looked at the shallow pit in front of her and stopped. Her old face suddenly became pale. Even though she had seen many big scenes in her life, the situation around the shallow pit under the moonlight still made her heart roll like waves. It took a long time for her to calm down. Give them a quick death. She took a deep breath, suppressed her emotions, and said lightly. When the old woman's voice fell, a man had already walked in. After a few swings of the knife, there was no more moaning on the ground. When he saw the scene around him, the man couldn't help but take a deep breath. A little fear appeared on his calm face. These people, how did they die? The old woman looked at Li Yi and spoke with difficulty. At this moment, she had completely forgotten the princess's instructions. Her mind was completely occupied by this hellish scene. These people have done all kinds of bad things. I'm afraid that God has annoyed them and punished them all. Li Yi sighed and said, just now, there was thunder from the sky, and the thunder snakes danced wildly. It was like God's punishment. After the punishment was over, these people were all like this. The old woman almost believed what he said. The loud sound and the fire just now spread out for more than a few miles. It was really like the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. How could it be done by a human? She stepped on the air twice, moved her foot, and dug out a black iron piece from the soil. Then, she looked at the people lying on the ground. She didn't know what to think, but her old face showed a shocked expression again. Even if it was really God's punishment, it couldn't be to punish these evil people. The old woman turned to look at Li Yi. He could actually attract God's punishment. Let the people of Ning Wangfu return and tell Princess and His Highness Shizhi that County Lieutenant Li is safe and sound. In order to save trouble, more than half of the dozen or so people from the Greenwood Forest were knocked unconscious. The sound of hooves and the light of the fire were getting closer. As the old woman spoke, 2 figures responded and dashed towards the direction of the fire. As soon as he saw the old woman, Li Yi knew that it was impossible to hide the matter of the gunpowder. Sky Law's words could only be used to fool ordinary people. These old fellows were all shrewd. He was grateful that the princess and Li Xian had sent these people over, but he felt that it would be better if they didn't come. Get someone to clean up this place. Don't leave any traces. I will personally inform Her Royal Highness about the details tomorrow. Li Yi had a tired expression on his face as he sighed. He had no other choice but to make the gunpowder. This thing was too dangerous and sensitive. It could be a trump card to save one's life, but it could also be the king of hell. It would be fine if he did it secretly without being discovered, but since it was seen by the princess's people, he could only obediently hand it over to the country. What was the use of keeping such a powerful thing? Did he want to rebel? Other than the royal family, no one could touch this thing. Thinking that there was such a trouble for no reason, Li Yi felt more resentment towards those people from the Greenwood Forest. A bunch of bastards. They could have been bandits, but they had to come all the way here to die. Even in death, they still want to make trouble for others. What are they after? There was a sound of wind breaking, and a graceful figure appeared beside him. When Rui saw so many people in the field, he had already grasped the hilt of his sword. But when he saw the old woman standing beside Li Yi, his heart finally relaxed. What was that loud noise just now? She was still thinking about the strange movement just now. Before Li Yi could answer, she lowered her head and saw the ground not far in front of her. Her pretty face changed abruptly. In the next moment, she could not help but hold on to Li Yi and enrich. Although she was skilled in martial arts and had killed those bandits with a single slash, she had never seen such a bloody scene before. Wretch! In fact, Li Yi's stomach was already churning. He was trying his best not to look at those things, but after being provoked by Lu Rui, he could not hold it in anymore. Lu Rui held on to him, and he held on to the wall. Their voices could be heard, and the experts in the palace paled. They could not help but cover their mouths with their hands. The people brought by the old woman moved very quickly. The big hole in the ground was quickly filled by them, and the bloodstains were also buried. As for the corpses of the people in the Greenwood Forest, they were moved to a distant place and burned. As expected of the experts from the palace, the way they destroyed the corpses was very professional. Fong walked around in a circle with a lantern, but he could not find any trace of the huge pit. Even the metal pieces that were stuck in the ground were dug out by them. Before the guards of Prince Ning Mansion could come over, they were chased away by the old woman's people. The matter of Tian Fa was of great importance. Ordinary people could not know about it, and the people of Prince Ning Mansion could not know about it. In fact, the old woman looked at Fong and the others with an unfriendly expression. Li Yi pondered in his heart, should he keep this old woman and run away with the rest of the people in the stockade? In the distance, the old woman and her people surrounded a bonfire. They seemed to be interrogating the captives, glancing at them from time to time. This was actually one of the reasons why Li Yi did not intend to hide it. If all the people in the forest were dead and there were no witnesses, it would be fine as long as they cleaned up the scene and did not leave any traces. But if those people were captured by the old woman, with a little intimidation, they would most likely tell the truth. No matter what excuse he made up, it would be useless. The largest group of people in the forest had been wiped out, and the remaining small characters were not a concern. Looking at the old woman's expression, they did not intend to leave tonight, and they could serve as guards. Li Yi shook his head and entered the courtyard. Lu Rui sat in the courtyard and raised her head to look at him. She did not speak. She did not feel as nauseous as before, but she could not get those images out of her mind. It was likely that she would not be able to sleep tonight. Li Yi walked straight into his room, closed the door, and lit the oil lamp. He sat in front of the table and stared at the flickering fireworks. He had lived in his original world for 20 years, and had only lived here for a few months. Many of his previous thoughts and ways of thinking had not changed. It was not until he was mercilessly slapped by reality again and again that he finally truly understood what kind of era this was. There were rulers here who could kill people and confiscate their possessions with a word. There were fierce bandits who dared to kill and rob for the slightest bit of greed. There were so many so-called powerful people in the forest who disregarded the law and human life. This was the true appearance of this world. He had business dealings with Prince Ning Mansion, and he had a close relationship with the heir. Her Highness the Princess often went to his place to eat, and even went to his bed when she was drunk. But at a critical moment, what use was all of this? All of them are unreliable. The corners of his mouth twitched, and a self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. Chapter 235. Li Yi was very melancholy, very melancholy. Just a few months ago, he was just eating and waiting to die. Every day, he would lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun. When he had nothing to do, he would tease the little servant girls, tell stories to the naughty children, and fight with Mississippi Lou for the last piece of chicken on the plate. It was a leisurely life. He did not know when it all started to change. He earned more and more money, the people he met became more and more distinguished, the money at home piled up like a mountain, and he spent all day talking and laughing with the princess and heir. The carriage of life started to move in a direction that he did not expect. That horse was so fast that it could not be pulled back. He thought that he could earn a little money and be content with a little wealth. A few days ago, he was kidnapped and almost lost his life. This time, he was attacked by dozens of people. He had never experienced such an exciting thing in his 2 lives. Gunpowder had been invented, but new troubles had followed. Although he did not know how much importance the emperor would place on this thing, no matter what the result was, it was unlikely that he would be able to live the way he had before. Moreover, today's matter gave him a wake-up call. Whether it was working with Ning Wangfu or his friendship with Li Xian, they were all illusory. If he used them as a trump card, he would die a terrible death sooner or later. In the past, he was really used to being lazy and thought about things in a simple way. Looking at it now, he was a little too naive. The oil lamp on the table gave off a spark. Li Yi rubbed his slightly swollen eyebrows. The injured area on his abdomen started to hurt again. After all, his injuries had not completely healed, and it was not suitable for him to make any strenuous movements. However, he had no other choice today. He had been rushing about, and in order to make the gunpowder in time, he did not even have time to eat. At this moment, his old injuries were showing signs of relapse, and his stomach was also unbearably hungry. There was also a faint pain coming from the back of his neck. Li Yi rubbed the back of his head and a trace of anger appeared on his face. Today, in front of so many people, he was knocked unconscious by Rui. It was a great humiliation. If he could not re-establish his authority as a husband, he would not be able to stay in this family in the future. Of course, knocking him out wasn't the main point. The main point was the attitude she had displayed throughout the entire incident. It was truly infuriating. There was a slight sound of footsteps outside the door, and then the door was pushed open. Lu Rui walked in with a tray in her hand. She put a bowl of steaming porridge on the table and said softly, "Uncle Feng said that you haven't eaten all day, so I just cooked some porridge. You should eat it while it's hot." Li Yi raised his head to look at her. He did not speak, nor did he move. Lu Rui knew that he was angry. Thinking of what he had just said, "I'll settle accounts with you later," she evaded his eyes and said, "My husband, remember to eat your porridge early. I'll leave first." Just as she was about to open the door and escape, an arm reached out from behind and pressed against the door. Panicking, she turned around and almost touched the tip of Li Yi's nose. "Don't you have anything to say to me?" At this time, in the flickering light of the room, the posture of the young man and woman was very similar to a kind of action called wall knocking in the future. According to the current situation, it should be more appropriate to call it door knocking. The expression on Li Yi's face was very serious, without a trace of cynicism. Lu Rui's answer was very important to him. "It's late, my husband, you should rest early." The expression on Lu Rui's pretty face became more panicked. When she was about to escape from the other side, Li Yi's other hand pressed against her. The palm that was supposed to be pressed on the door was pressed on her chest because of her sudden movement. Lu Rui's body froze. After the expression on her face froze, her pretty face immediately became extremely red. Looking up at Li Yi, she said in a trembling voice, "Husband, my husband." At this moment, she was just a shy and ordinary woman. How could she look like a grandmaster of a generation? However, when she raised her head and met Li Yi's gaze, she saw something different in his eyes that were as deep as a pool of water. She understood the hidden emotions in Li Yi's eyes, causing her body to tremble. Her face gradually turned from red to pale. It was as if something very important to her was about to leave her. Biting her lower lip, she lowered her head and said, "I know I was wrong." Li Yi heaved a sigh of relief. He seemed to have put down something in the bottom of his heart. He looked at her and asked, "Tell me, what did you do wrong?" After saying that, he felt that there was something wrong with the touch of one of his hands. When he looked down, he could not help but be stunned. No wonder his hand felt soft. "I shouldn't have knocked you out, my husband." She lowered her head and said softly, "What else?" This was not the time to retreat. Li Yi pretended not to notice that his hand was placed where it should not be and continued to ask. Although she shouldn't have knocked him out, this was only a superficial reason. As the saying goes, husband and wife are birds in the same forest. When disaster strikes, they separate. Bah! Husband and wife are one. If there are any difficulties, they can discuss and solve it together. Chauvinism is not good. She knocked him out at this critical moment and sent him down the mountain. Did she never see him as her husband? Also, Lu Rui thought for a moment and said, "I shouldn't have made the decision on my own and given those who left 10 taels of silver as relocation allowance to each household." What? Li Yi's eyes widened. 10 taels of silver as relocation allowance? He calculated in his heart. If the Lu family and the villagers were given 10 taels of silver each, wouldn't that mean that he had spent nearly 300 taels of silver today? This wastrel. How many times did he have to blackmail Li Xian to earn back the 300 taels of silver? It was over. With this, the back garden of the big house had been given away. Li Yi's heart ached. No matter how you put it, they have been implicated by me. Lu Rui sighed and said, "Forget it. Don't do it again." 300 taels of silver was fine. He could earn it back. After those people left, it would be peaceful in the future. Lu Rui lowered her head and Li Yi put his hand on her chest. When the two of them stopped talking and diverted their attention, the atmosphere gradually became awkward. Li Yi's stomach growled. He pretended to be careless and removed his hand from her chest. Lu Rui breathed a sigh of relief and said hurriedly, "Husband, hurry up and eat the porridge. It's going to get cold soon." Li Yi nodded. He was really hungry now. After the scene just now gradually faded in his mind, his appetite also recovered a lot. He quickly finished the porridge. He touched his belly and slightly frowned. "Is the wound starting to hurt again?" Lu Rui asked worriedly. "A little," Li Yi said. "Husband, lie on the bed first. I will use my true qi to help you comb your meridians." Lu Rui put away the bowls and chopsticks and said. Every time Rui helped him comb his meridians, it was probably when Li Yi felt the most comfortable. Her hands seemed to have some kind of magic that could reduce the pain to the minimum. Li Yi lay on the bed and closed his eyes. While he was enjoying it, the tiredness brought about by running around for a whole day gradually came over him. When Lu Rui withdrew her hands, she saw that he was breathing evenly. He had already fallen asleep. She was startled for a moment and her pretty face suddenly blushed. She looked around and took off her embroidered shoes. She curled up at the foot of the bed and crossed her slender legs. She wrapped her arms around herself and quietly looked at his relaxed expression. Her pretty face alternated between shyness and confusion. After an unknown amount of time, she peeked outside the door like a thief and lay down beside Li Yi. She slept with her clothes on. She turned her head to the side and glanced outside before slowly closing her eyes. At this moment, the young girl sitting in the courtyard stared blankly at the round moon in the sky. Occasionally, she would glance at the door not far away. Even when the lights in the room were extinguished, no one came out from inside. A trace of astonishment appeared on her pretty face, and her beautiful eyes suddenly widened. Chapter 236. Li Yi had a dream, a very erotic dream. He couldn't remember the content of the dream clearly after he woke up. He only remembered that the woman in the dream had an enchanting figure, but her face was always covered with a layer of fog. Later, the fog dispersed. What happened next was even more bizarre. At first, the woman looked like Rui. Then, somehow, she turned into Wan Ruoqing. Then, she turned into Li Mingzhu. What was even more bizarre was that she turned into Miss Lu in the end. Then Li Yi woke up with a start. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and erased the scene of Mississippi Lu chasing him with a sword from his mind. The reason why he knew it was an erotic dream was that when he was about to put on his clothes, he was embarrassed to find that his underwear was wet. He sat on the bed and stared blankly for a while. He didn't even remember how he fell asleep last night. The faint fragrance around him made him a little more awake. Unfortunately, he still couldn't remember the content of the erotic dream. He changed into a clean underwear and got up to wash his underwear in the morning. Rui pushed the door open and came in with a basin of hot water. Seeing what he was doing, she put down the copper basin and said, "Come and wash first, my husband. I'll wash your clothes." Li Yi was embarrassed to let others wash his underwear for him even though they were close. Li Yi was about to refuse when an old woman with a straight face came in from outside and said, "County Magistrate Li, my lady is here." Since the princess was here, Li Yi had to put down what he was doing first. He simply washed his face, wiped it, and followed her outside. Most of the people in Willow Leaves village had left, and the houses were empty. Last night, the old woman and the others rested in one of the houses. When Li Yi and the old woman walked over, the people she brought yesterday were guarding around. After Li Yi went in, he immediately closed the door. A dozen people patrolled around the yard. Although it was not so exaggerated that even a fly couldn't fly through, it was extremely strict. A stooped old man with white hair and a trembling body approached from afar. Just as he was about to enter the courtyard, a guard hurried over and blocked his way. "Old man, you can't go in here," the guard said politely. His tone was gentle. Her Royal Highness was in the courtyard next door. The people in the surrounding courtyards had been cleared out by them. For the safety of Her Royal Highness, of course, they couldn't let this old man in. "This is my home. Why can't I come in?" The old man was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and looked at him with narrowed eyes. "What's going on? I went out for a stroll early in the morning, and now I'm not even allowed to enter the house?" The guard forced a smile and said, "Old man, why don't you take a stroll outside and come back later?" The guard felt depressed. If Her Royal Highness hadn't told him not to be rude to the people here, he wouldn't have talked so much nonsense with this old man. The old man looked at him with dissatisfaction and said, "My old arms and legs can't walk anymore." "Who are you? Do you still respect the law? Does the world outside still belong to the Li family?" The guard's mouth couldn't help but twitch. He couldn't answer the old man's words. At this moment, the old woman noticed the situation here. She walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nanny," this old man insisted on going in. The guard cupped his hands and respectfully retreated to the side. This kind of thing should be solved by the people above. We still have to respect the law. The old man shook his head and slowly walked towards the courtyard. "Stop." The old woman didn't care so much. She immediately reached out to grab the old man's shoulder. When the old man took a step forward, he accidentally tripped on the stairs. His entire body staggered and he almost fell to the ground. However, the old woman's grab just happened to miss. He used his walking stick to stabilize himself and stood up with great difficulty. He shook his head and sighed, "I'm old, I'm useless." A trace of doubt flashed across the old woman's face. Just as she was about to make another move, the old man massaged his waist and seemed to be talking to himself. "Young lady's legs are still nimble. It's just that these mantis claws are a bit lacking." Hearing this, the old woman's expression froze. At this moment, the old man had already pushed open the courtyard's door and walked in. "Young lady." The guard didn't hear the second half of what the old man said. He almost couldn't help but laugh when he heard the way the old man addressed the nanny. However, after thinking about it carefully, this old man was a bit older than the nanny. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with what he said. At this moment, the guard didn't notice that the old woman's face was pale. "You too," His murky old eyes were filled with dissatisfaction and disbelief as he murmured two words. When Li Yi walked in, Mingzu, who was dressed in light clothing, was standing in the courtyard. She pointed at the stone table and stone stools that had been wiped clean and said, "Sit. Since you knew those people were coming yesterday, why didn't you come find me?" Mingzu sat down opposite him and asked him. "Just a small matter, there was no need to trouble you." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Based on the scale of the people in the forest last night, unless there were enough experts, or if they directly mobilized the troops stationed in the prefectural city, otherwise they wouldn't have much of an effect. Even if she was the princess, she didn't have the power to mobilize the troops. Furthermore, she was always elusive. After hitting a wall at Ning Wangfu, in an emergency, she didn't have the time to ask her for help. It was better to use the most direct and effective method, just like last night." Mingzhu's expression was slightly shocked. She had learned about the danger last night from the nanny, but she didn't think that when he spoke of this matter, he would be so indifferent. "The sky punishment last night, what happened?" After seeing with her own eyes that Li Yi was fine, her heart relaxed and she went straight to the point. "Speaking of which, this matter was actually the biggest unexpected gain last night. Did the person in front of her, whom she and her royal father had placed such high hopes on, really attract the sky punishment?" She had personally asked those people of the forest who had been captured, but those people had long been scared out of their wits and didn't know anything. The few who knew had most likely died under the sky punishment at that time. "If I said that the heavens couldn't stand their actions and sent down lightning to strike them all to death, would you believe me?" Li Yi asked probingly. Mingzu looked straight at him. Li Yi sighed. "Then if I said that this is the forbidden 5 lightning heaven heart mantra, passed down from generation to generation in the Li family and only passed down to males and not females, you definitely wouldn't believe me, right?" "Stop it," Mingzu looked at him and said. As expected, he couldn't fool her. Li Yi used his own experience to prove that it was not easy to fool the ancient people just because they had less than 1,000 years of evolution. Excuses like the sky punishment forbidden mantra couldn't fool them at all. "Can I not say it?" Li Yi wanted to try one last time. "No," Her Highness answered quickly and straightforwardly. She had heard the nanny describe the scene last night. If she could master that level of power, it would have an extraordinary significance to the Jing kingdom, which was not as strong as the surrounding countries. Of course, she was still in a fog about that power. What exactly it was, whether it could be mastered by anyone other than Li Yi, and whether it could be used on a large scale were all unknown at the moment. "I have a condition," Li Yi took a deep breath and said. "Say it." "As long as it's not too much, I can satisfy you," Mingzu said generously. She had been with Li Yi for a long time. Putting aside their good personal relationship, she admired his ability and talent very much. Naturally, she wouldn't be too stingy. "I'm the only one who knows the core secret of that thing. It has nothing to do with anyone else. I hope you won't make it difficult for them," Li Yi said, looking at her. When he said that, Mingzu finally realized that what he was going to say next was extremely important. Of course, she also understood the reason why he had been so worried since he came in. "I hope you can understand," Mingzu looked at him with a serious expression and said, "You are more important than the sky punishment." When she said that, it was from the bottom of her heart, without any perfunctory or pretense. In fact, that was exactly what she thought in her heart. Li Yi was a person who could create miracles and surprises. Just the fact that he could control the sky punishment was more important than the sky punishment itself. Li Yi was stunned. He was surprised by her words. "Am I really that important?" When he turned around and saw her serious expression, he couldn't help but be moved. "Is this a confession?" Chapter 237. Are you saying that this thing called gunpowder has already existed for a long time? Mingzu looked at him and asked with a frown. Li Yi nodded and said, "Fireworks, firecrackers, and the acrobatics in the brothel are actually the same principle as gunpowder. The formula for gunpowder had actually been created by a crazy Taoist who wanted to take gunpowder to ascend to the heavens." However, the ratio was not right, so it could not achieve the effect that gunpowder should have. And its application was actually very wide. When Li Yi was in the brothel, he had seen the acrobats spitting out smoke, and they used gunpowder. Then why didn't they? Mingzu only said half of the sentence, but the meaning was very clear. If fireworks and acrobats could cause the commotion last night, those people should have died long ago, and it was even more impossible for them to be discovered until now. Li Yi explained, this is about the ratio of each ingredient in the formula. Even if it is a very small difference, the effect will be like heaven and earth. How did you discover the secret? Mingzu looked at him and asked curiously. She had actually been pondering this question in her heart for a long time. Whether it was the problem of the falling stone, or the horseshoe, or the method of seeing through people's hearts, or the current gunpowder, for thousands of years, no one in the whole world had discovered the secret behind it. Why did it have to be him? Why did it have to be him every time? Could it be that he was really smarter than everyone in the world combined? Li Yi thought in her heart, how else could he discover it? He relied on the accumulation of hundreds and thousands of years of knowledge, and the library in his mind to cheat. At that time, I was just making firecrackers for fun. As I was making it, I accidentally discovered it. Li Yi looked at her and said. Mingzu glanced at him. She felt that he must have accumulated a lot of good karma in his previous life for him to be able to sit here and talk to her now. Then she thought of another question and asked again, in that case, other people can also discover the mystery behind it? Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows. She could control herself, but could she control others? From the perspective of probability, that is indeed the case. Li Yi looked at him and said, maybe a few days, a few months, a few years, or even a few decades. But maybe tomorrow, a second person will discover it. Probability. Mingzu was confused again. What is probability? That's not important. Li Yi waved his hand, looked at her, and said seriously, the important thing is, what do you plan to do after I give you the formula? Right now, the Jing Kingdom's soldiers are at war with the Qi Kingdom at the border. If the gunpowder is really as powerful as you've said, it'll be a great achievement for you. If you can perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield, my imperial father will definitely reward you. In fact, it's highly possible that you'll be promoted to an official position. Mingzu thought for a moment before she looked at him and said slowly. If such a national treasure was discovered by an ordinary person, what awaited him would not be a reward, but a disaster. In order to prevent the secret formula from being leaked, he would probably be executed in secret. The best outcome would be imprisonment for life. This was because the secret formula was of great importance. Once it was leaked to other countries, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, Li Yi was different. The more outstanding his performance, the more important he would be in her imperial father's heart. He was originally a talent that her imperial father admired greatly. The reason why he had not transferred him to the capital, but only made him a lowly county officer, was that he wanted him to polish himself for 2 years. After all, although he was very ambitious, he was really lazy. Such a character was not suitable for development in the imperial court. In fact, in the beginning, even she herself did not know why her imperial father would value someone he had only met once. Just based on his previous actions, it was far from enough. However, what happened later forced her to admit that her imperial father was indeed her imperial father. His judgment of people was far superior to hers. The young man sitting in front of her was an existence that could constantly create miracles. After she finished speaking, she looked at Li Yi, but found that he did not seem to be in high spirits. The lifelong pursuit of a scholar is nothing more than to be promoted to an official position. But you don't seem to be interested in these things. She finally asked the question that had puzzled her for a long time. Li Yi looked at her and asked, if everyone's ideals were the same, as the princess, shouldn't you be deep in the palace right now? Mingzu was speechless for a moment, not knowing how to answer. After a moment, she raised her head to look at Li Yi again and said, you know, this kind of life can't continue forever. Li Yi nodded noncommittally. After experiencing this incident, he also realized how childish his previous thoughts were. Living in such an era, it was not so easy to live a carefree and unfettered life. Even the emperor, who decided whether everyone's life was carefree or not, could not be associated with the word carefree. The government can't always keep an eye on those people from the Lulan forest. Although they are not a threat to your wife, the others will still be troublesome. Mingzu looked at him and said, I will find a place in the prefecture city for them to settle down first. With regards to Lu Rui, she had some thoughts of comparing them in her heart previously. But now, she really did not have any thoughts at all. We will discuss the matter of the gunpowder in detail when you return to the prefecture city. Mingzu did not continue to ask Li Yi about the gunpowder formula. She stood up and clapped her hands in farewell. The thing that emitted the fire and loud noise yesterday, does it have a name? She turned back to ask when she reached the door. Perhaps we can call it, hand grenade? Li Yi thought for a moment and said. Then let's call it, sky punishment. After a pause, Mingzu nodded and simply turned to leave. Li Yi sat in the courtyard for a while, a thoughtful expression on his face. After a while, he also stood up and left. Her Highness did not directly take the formula for the gunpowder, which was indeed out of his expectations. But he also knew that she was conveying a kind attitude to him, a kind of friendly attitude. Li Yi sighed. He had to admit, Her Highness was very courageous. But, this kind of hot potato, unless it was necessary, he would not touch it again in the future. When he once again returned to his own courtyard, Xiao Huan was holding two red and swollen eyes, drying the underwear that Li Yi had washed before he left. When she saw Li Yi, her little mouth twitched and her eyes immediately filled with tears. Last night, she had been left alone in the county government and had been worried the whole night. It was only in the morning that she was brought up by the constable's sister. Son-in-law, the next moment, she threw herself into Li Yi's arms like a swallow throwing itself into his arms, tears falling down her cheeks. Chapter 238. The little servant girl didn't sleep at all last night. At this time, she was finally relieved and threw herself into Li Yi's arms. She cried, and her voice gradually became softer. After a while, Li Yi looked at the girl who was breathing evenly and still had traces of tears on her face. He shook his head helplessly, bent down and carefully carried her horizontally. After returning to his room, he gently laid her down on the bed and covered her with a quilt. Although it was thrilling last night, after this incident, no gangsters from the Green Forest would dare to come to Willow Leaf Village to make trouble. After the earth-shattering experience, Willow Leaf Village returned to its usual peace in one night. But in some other places, the waves were just starting to rise. The roadside tea houses far away from the prefectural city had always been the gathering place for people from Jianghu. Drinking tea and resting was only one of the reasons. Another important reason was that they could get the latest information here. Most of the big and small things that happened in Jianghu came from here. The tea house was simply built with a few pieces of wood. The winter weather was cold, so the roof was covered with a straw curtain and the surroundings were covered with dark coarse cloth. The space inside the tea house wasn't big. Around several old wooden tables, all of them were filled with people. The space seemed a little crowded. Two strong men opened the curtain, and the cold wind poured in from outside. Seeing that the tea house was so crowded and there seemed to be no place to sit, the two of them were startled and didn't immediately walk in. If you want to come in quickly. The strange wind today is really cold. Being blown by the cold wind outside, the person closest to the door tightened his clothes and urged. The two of them put down the curtain and walked in. After looking around, they still couldn't find a place, so they squatted down in the corner and said, "Waiter, give me a pot of hot tea." "Okay, please wait a moment." The waiter touched his head with some doubts. The business of the tea house was always slow, but these days it was surprisingly good. There were often not enough seats in the room. Soon he put aside his doubts and ran to prepare the tea. "There's still no news of Zhu Tufu and the others." "I'm afraid they're dead." The two of them squatted on the ground and waited for the waiter to serve tea. A square-faced man murmured, "I guess so." Another man nodded and said, "However, this matter is a little too inconceivable. Zhu Tufu's group of several dozen people is quite a force in the entire Jianghu. How could they just disappear without a trace? Not even the slightest bit of news has been sent out. It's good that he's dead. At least the Jianghu will be less chaotic, the square-faced man said. Brothers, are you talking about that bone-paring knife Zhu Tufu? A gentle voice came from the front. The two looked up and saw a man smiling at them at a table in front of them. That's Zhu Tufu. The square-faced man cupped his hands and said, Brothers, would you like to join us for a chat? The man smiled and said to the people beside him, Everyone, squeeze a little and make room for these two brothers. Thank you, brothers. The two of them looked at each other and didn't refuse. They sat down on the seats that the others had vacated. My name is Chen Jingsheng. May I know how to address you two brothers? The man personally poured tea for them and asked with a smile. The name of Hero Chen resounds like thunder. The two of them looked at the man in surprise. Then the square-faced man introduced himself. I am Zhang Dujiang, and this is my younger brother. After hearing the man's name, the two men were relieved. The Hero Chen in front of them was not someone that those self-proclaimed heroes of the Jianghu could compare with. He came from a prestigious family and was already somewhat famous at a young age. When he went out to roam the Jianghu, he did many things to help the weak and the bully. He had a good reputation in the Jianghu. After exchanging names with the men at the table, the conversation became more casual. Brother Zhang just mentioned Zhu Tufu. Do you have any news of him? Chen Jingxing saw the two of them looking at him and explained, To tell you the truth, I have been tracking Zhu Tufu for a long time. That evil person calls himself a hero and brings disaster to the Jianghu. Chivalrous people like us all want to get rid of him, but we haven't been able to find any trace of him. When I heard that he appeared in Qing and Prefecture, I immediately rushed over. The man surnamed Zhang took a sip of tea and said, We only know that Zhu Tufu, the bone-paring knife, and Cui Yan, the death-bringer, are leading dozens of Jianghu bandits. They are going to the Willow Leaf village to cause trouble for a woman. But the strange thing is, after last night's operation, there has been no news of them. Is it that woman surnamed Lu? Chen Jingxing asked. The man surnamed Zhang nodded. I have long heard that there is a heroine in Qing and Prefecture who has captured countless scum of the Jianghu. She is truly a role model for our generation. When I heard about this the day before yesterday, I wanted to gather my fellow comrades to help, but I was too late. The man surnamed Shen sighed and said in a regretful tone. The bone-paring knife, Zhu Tufu, has now had his bones shaved off. The death-bringer, Cui Yan, has long since gone to hell to meet the king of hell. At this time, a voice came from the side. In the tea house, everyone was originally listening to the man surnamed Shen speak. When these words came out, the person who spoke immediately became the focus of the tea house, and countless gazes looked over. What do you mean by that, could it be? Chen Jingxing asked with a face full of bewilderment. The person laughed again and said, Last night, not long after Zhu Tufu and the others went up the mountain, there were suddenly several loud noises coming from the mountain, and there were faint flashes of fire and thunder. It is said that Zhu Tufu and the others had committed many evil deeds and angered the heavens, so they were all struck to death by heavenly punishment. Chen Jingxing laughed and said, Such a story is too absurd. Could it be that you really believe it? He had also heard of heavenly punishment today, but he had only laughed it off. If this was true, then wouldn't all the villains in the world have been struck to death? The person stood up and walked out the door. When he lifted the curtain, he said indifferently, This morning, someone saw the soldiers carrying the corpses of Cui Yan and the others down the mountain. I heard from my brothers in the yamen that the dozens of bandits from the Greenwood Forest who caused trouble last night have all been executed, all executed. In the tea house, everyone who heard these words had incomparably shocked expressions on their faces. If Zhu Tufu and the others were only a few people, and they were killed by that woman, perhaps they would only think that the woman's martial arts were very high, and they would not be too surprised. But those were dozens of bandits from the Greenwood Forest. This force was not small even in the entire martial world. It was really hard to imagine that they had all died. When the crowd wanted to continue asking, the person who had just spoken had already left the tea house, obviously unwilling to speak any further. Many people were shocked and found it hard to digest this news. There were also a few people who secretly changed their expressions. In the Jianghu, there were quite a few people who paid attention to this matter. In just half a day, similar news had spread from everywhere. Since the previous night, no one had seen the dozens of people who were with Zhu Tufu, which indirectly proved the authenticity of this news. Until someone used all kinds of connections to obtain accurate news from the government. In order to capture those villains, the government had already sent experts to lie in ambush there, waiting for them to come to them. And the bandits from last night had stubbornly resisted, and they had indeed all been executed. This news, without a doubt, threw a huge rock into the already turbulent lake. A huge wave, with Qing and Prefecture as the center, swept out in all directions. Chapter 239. For the servants of Ning Wangfu, today was a very normal day. Every day, Wang Fei would sit in the garden for a while. The gardeners who had worked in the Fu for their entire lives would use scissors to trim the flowers and plants every morning. Wang Fei liked cleanliness. The places she frequented would be cleaned almost every day. The servants had their own duties and were busy at their own positions. When a well-dressed and valiant-looking man walked by, he attracted the attention of the maids in the prince's mansion. Its bodyguard Lin, the faces of the servant girls showed admiration. Their eyes stared at the disappearing figure of the man and they started to whisper. "Hey, did you guys notice that when bodyguard Lin walked by, he looked at me a bit more?" "Shoo shoo shoo," bodyguard Lin was clearly looking at me. "Peh, you two aren't ashamed." Bodyguard Lin's eyes wouldn't be that bad. As the servant girls talked, they started to tease and push each other. The servants nearby swallowed their saliva. Isn't he just the leader of the guards? No matter how strong he is, isn't he still a servant like us? Thinking about the way the servant girls looked at that man, they didn't feel good. They were all servants, but wasn't that Lin just a bit more handsome, a bit more skilled, and was more favored by Wang Yi? What was so great about that? That group of servant girls that only knew how to judge people by their appearance was really vulgar. Last night, when a servant woke up, he saw that guy and a group of people coming back in the middle of the night. They were very sneaky and didn't seem to have done anything good. If there was a chance, he had to remind them. You might know a person's face but not their heart. They shouldn't be fooled by a few words from that Lin. The man surnamed Lin naturally didn't know what the servant girls and servants were thinking as he walked with large strides towards Wang Yi's study. Wang Yi loved books to the point that he was crazy. There were only 2 study rooms in the Fu and they were filled with all kinds of valuable books. If Wang Yi wasn't accompanying Wang Fei every day, there was a 90% chance that he would be in the study room. When he reached the door of the study room, there was naturally an old housekeeper who went in to report. A moment later, the old housekeeper came out of the study. After nodding to him, the man surnamed Lin pushed open the door and walked in. Wang Yi. He respectfully bowed to the middle-aged man across the desk and waited at the side. Why did Xian send you out last night? After waiting for a while, King Ning's voice sounded. Your Highness, it's because. He didn't dare to hide anything from His Highness and told him everything. Before we arrived there, the conflict had already ended. The princess's people were also there and asked us to come back directly. However, I heard that County Magistrate Li and the others were unharmed, and those Greenwood bandits were all killed. As for what happened last night, I don't know. Yesterday, before they arrived at the Willow Leaf Village, they were driven back by the princess's people. That was all they knew. What? There's actually such a thing? Prince Ning was slightly stunned when he heard this. He then realized that the reason why Li Yi came to the Wang Fu to see him yesterday was because of this matter. If he had known in advance, he wouldn't have rejected him like that, but it was too late now. However, with the masters brought by Mingzu from the palace, those Greenwood bandits wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. The guard leader wanted to tell him about the white light and the loud noise he saw, but on the way back, some brothers said it was an earthquake, Some said it was haunted, and some even said it was a divine punishment. At this moment, he really didn't know what to say. In order to avoid saying something wrong, he simply kept his mouth shut. Prince Ning called him here was nothing more than to know what Li Xian had done. As for Li Yi, it would be best if nothing happened to him. If something happened to him, he would only feel sorry for a moment, and maybe he would completely forget about it tomorrow. After all, these ordinary people didn't matter to him. He waved his hand, indicating that the guard could go out. "Excuse me." The guard surnamed Lin bowed and left the room. Prince Ning shook his head and put this matter behind him. He once again focused on the book in front of him. Within a day, the dozens of families in Willow Leaf Village left only a dozen families. It didn't take Li Yi much effort to persuade them, and almost all of them agreed to move to the prefecture. He didn't even persuade them. He just mentioned it, and they readily agreed. They had lived in a place for a lifetime, so of course they had feelings. However, the village was too remote, and it was inconvenient to come and go. Almost all of these people had been working for Li Yi since the beginning, so they didn't leave at the critical moment. After selling candied fruits for so long, Rui Lu also got dividends, so they had accumulated a lot of money at home. Their thoughts that they didn't have before gradually became active. Living in the prefecture had many conveniences. Moreover, they didn't need to spend money to move, and someone would naturally arrange for them. This kind of good thing was rare. "Hee, son-in-law, if you want us to move, we will move." Fang became simple and honest again. His experience in the past few months told him that it was not wrong to listen to the son-in-law. As for the others, they only knew that if they followed in Fang's footsteps, they would have food to eat, money to earn, and a new house to live in. Although this was not the capital city, it was very easy for the princess to settle more than 10 families in the prefecture. Of course, it was impossible for every family to be assigned a big house. The location of the place was in the Golden Area, and it was said that it used to be the mansion of a rich businessman. It was not small, and there were many independent courtyards, which were enough to accommodate so many people. At noon, Emingzu sent 2 people to pick them up. That afternoon, everyone had already packed up their luggage. They didn't have any valuable things at home, and if they needed something, they could buy it in the city. "Are we leaving now?" At the entrance of the village, second granduncle leaned on his walking stick and looked at the empty village with a nostalgic expression on his old face. "Second granduncle, don't be sad. We are going to live in a big house at the foot of the mountain." Seeing this, Fang comforted him. Not to mention second great-uncle who had lived here his whole life, even he felt a little reluctant to leave when he was about to leave. Let's go." The old man waved his hand. After looking at the village again, he took the lead and walked forward. Fang hurriedly chased after him. "Second granduncle, the mountain road is hard to walk on. Do you want me to carry you?" "My old arms and legs can still walk these few steps. Then, let me carry your bag." In front of second granduncle, Fang was especially attentive. Xiao Huan carried her small bag in her arms. When they walked out of the village, she looked up at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, are we coming back after going to the prefecture?" "We're not coming back." Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile. The little maid nodded and turned her head again. She looked deeply at the place where she grew up. There was a little reluctance on her face, but it quickly turned into determination. She was a maid. Wherever Miss and son-in-law were, she would be there. With this thought, a smile appeared on her little face again. After a moment of absent-mindedness, when she turned back, Li Yi and the others had already walked more than 10 steps. She hugged the small bag in her arms tightly and hurriedly chased after them. Chapter 240. The location of the house was very good. It could be considered a high-class residential area in Qing and prefectural city. The people around it were either rich or noble. Perhaps it was a coincidence that the princess's house was next door. The courtyard assigned to Li Yi was the largest, but he didn't move in. This place was less than a quarter of an hour away from Rui Square. He was already used to living there, so there was no need to move back and forth. Fong and the others were obviously very satisfied with their new home. After seeing their own house, the trace of melancholy that arose from moving away from Willow Leaf Village quickly disappeared. Although it was still far from the beautiful wives and big house he had imagined, at least he had taken a big step towards his goal. Progress was a good thing, and a bright and beautiful future was waiting for them. They also didn't have to worry about the bandits from the Green Forest coming to cause trouble. Even the most brainless person wouldn't dare to gather so many people at the same time and act wildly in the prefectural city. Without so many people, if they encountered Fong and the others, they would die a horrible death. The gunpowder formula had already been given to Mingzu. This thing hadn't been seen by anyone, so he would never hand it over. But since things had already come to this point, he could only pretend to be generous and give it away. As for what they would use it for in the future, he didn't know, and he didn't want to know. However, this was how things were in the world. Accidents always came so suddenly, and no one knew what would happen in the next moment. The next day, Li Yi, who had been resting at home, was hurriedly summoned by a bailiff. An hour later, he appeared in a village close to the prefectural city. Mingzu had already arrived before him. At this moment, she was standing under a courtyard wall with a thoughtful expression on her face. On the way here, the bailiff had already roughly explained the situation to him. This place was called Lu Family Village. They were currently at the home of a landlord in Lu Family Village. This morning, the landlord's servant came to the yamen to report that something strange had happened at home. A few bailiffs followed the servant to investigate. It wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. Of the 3 cows in Squire Lu's house, 2 had mysteriously died last night. The farming cows were all recorded by the yamen, and if they were slaughtered without permission, they would be jailed. There had to be an explanation for the death of 2 cows. If Li Yi hadn't asked for leave, he would have brought the bailiffs to investigate this morning. What's wrong? Is there something wrong? Li Yi walked in front of Mingzu and asked with some doubt. If Li Mingzhu had nothing better to do, she might have done something about the death of 2 cows. After all, it was in her nature to be a busybody. However, she had just received the gunpowder formula yesterday, so she probably did not have the time to do so. Look, isn't this? She looked at Li Yi and pointed at the collapsed wall. Her tone was a little bewildered. Li Yi looked in the direction of her finger and was slightly stunned. A portion of the courtyard wall that was about 10 feet tall had collapsed, and the base of the wall had caved in, forming a large black pit. Li Yi was slightly startled. He pinched a handful of soil on the ground and sniffed it. He smelled a familiar pungent smell. This time, even he was a little surprised. It couldn't be such a coincidence, right? He turned his head and looked at Mingzhu's eyes. He nodded slightly. That's right. Sirs, even if I had the guts, I wouldn't dare to kill the cows. I really don't know how they died. A fat man wearing a squire's uniform was crying. His voice was full of tears and snot. Anyone who saw it would be sad, and anyone who heard it would be tearful. At this time, of course, he couldn't keep his composure. If he couldn't explain this matter clearly and the blame was placed on him, he would really be finished. All right, don't cry. What happened last night? Tell me the truth. Li Yi was a little annoyed by this guy's crying, so he waved his hand and said. The problem now was no longer the death of 2 cows. He didn't know who was the genius that actually made the black gunpowder. If this matter couldn't be explained clearly, many people would be out of luck. Hearing the county lieutenant's words, the fat squire immediately stopped crying. Sirs, it was like this. Yesterday, I had just married my 3rd concubine. I drank a few more cups with the guests. When I woke up, it was already past midnight. I took off my clothes, skip this part, I was about to. Suddenly, I heard an earth-shattering sound coming from outside. I was so scared that my legs went weak. Skip this part as well. When the servants of the mansion went to check, they saw that 2 cows in the cowshed were dead. Even the wall of the courtyard was missing a hole. The fat squire still had some lingering fear when he thought about this matter. He said in horror. Some servants said that when they woke up at night, they saw the cowshed on fire. Then, a thunderbolt fell from the sky and split the courtyard wall open. The 2 cows were also taken by the heavens. I swear that I will eat vegetarian and pray to Buddha in the future. I will repair the bridge and pave the road. I will do more good things for the villagers. I only hope that the heavens will not send down the divine thunder for the sake of my parents and children. Squire Lu knelt in the courtyard and kept kowtowing. The commotion last night must have scared him half to death. Moreover, he was scared at that awkward moment. Whether he could still have a happy life in the future was also a problem. It's definitely gunpowder. Li Yi turned to look at Mingzu and whispered. The princess pressed her eyebrows and looked at Li Yi with an incomparably complicated expression. Yesterday, he had just said that from the point of view of probability, someone would discover the secret of gunpowder within a day, or at most, in a few decades. He was right, and it was the worst possibility. Why are you looking at me? I didn't do it. Mingzu glanced at him. Of course, she knew that it wasn't Li Yi who did it. The city gates were closed at night and no one could come out. Moreover, he was selfless in offering the formula and had no grudges with Squire Lu. There was no need for him to do such a thing. The plan now was to find the person who knew the formula as soon as possible. If someone with ulterior motives used it, the consequences would be unthinkable. Think carefully. Who do you have grudges with? Don't overlook any of them. Mingzu looked at Squire Lu and asked with a frown. No. I have always been well-behaved and kind. I don't have any enemies. Squire Lu shook his head with a face full of doubt. So you admit that the death of the 2 cows was your fault? The princess's expression became a little unfriendly. Squire Zhang from the neighboring village had a quarrel with me last year over the ownership of a piece of land. I'm afraid he still holds a grudge. Lu ergo, he is a farmer in the village and has always had a grudge with me. To tell you the truth, a few days ago, he saw me having an affair with the cripple's wife from the Lu family next door. Although I paid him some money, I feel that the way he looks at me these days is very strange. After being glanced at by Mingzu, Squire Lu's amnesia immediately recovered and he started to talk non-stop. Her people had already recorded everything. After a while, Squire Lu said with a bitter face, Your Excellencies, other than these, I really can't remember anything else. The person in charge of the recording twitched his mouth. There were already more than 20 names written on the paper. Master, 3rd Madam hasn't eaten since yesterday. Just now when the cook brought the food over, she still didn't eat. No matter how we tried to persuade her, it was useless. A round-faced girl ran in from outside the door and said as she ran. When she saw the people in official uniforms in the room, she was immediately stunned. In his heart, Li Yi felt that this 3rd Madam was also a person with a story. However, in this era, such things were common. Parents' orders and the words of a matchmaker were everything. The probability of a woman marrying a Rui Langjun was low. It was negligible. Squire Lu laughed dryly and said, Your Excellencies, please don't laugh at me. This 3rd Madam has been in the brothel for a long time. She just came to the mansion yesterday, so she might not be used to it yet. I will slowly train her in the future. Brothel? Li Yi and Mingzu looked over at the same time. Chapter 241. Yes. Speaking of this 3rd Madam, Lu Yuanwei couldn't help but smile. He even forgot about the possibility of a lawsuit. I'm not bragging, but although there are many beautiful women in the brothel, Yunyang is one of the best. Who knows how many people want her as a concubine? If it wasn't for the fact that her father still owes me a lot of rent, this matter wouldn't be easy. Where is the brothel you mentioned? Before Lu Yuanwei could finish, he was interrupted by Li Yi. Lu Yuanwei pointed in a direction and said, It's not far. It's just under the eastern city wall. The 2 lords will see it when they reach the city gate. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Call your 3rd Madam over. This. Lu Yuanwei's face showed hesitation. He had just married the third madam last night and hadn't had time to consummate their marriage. Looking at this lord's expression, could it be that he wanted to? Lu Yuanwei felt regret. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have bragged so much. Now, the concubine he married might fly away. Go, call the third madam over. He glared at the girl. If she hadn't barged in, how would this be happening? Lu Yuanwei didn't dare to refuse. After all, his lawsuit hadn't come to an end yet. If he offended the lord in front of him, he wouldn't have a good time. The girl hurriedly ran out. After a while, she came back with a young woman. The woman had delicate features, but her face was pale, revealing a delicate and pitiful posture. In Li Yi's eyes, her appearance was average. Although the princess beside him was wearing neutral clothing, her radiance far outshone the third madam. However, Lu Yuanwei was at least 30 years old. It was a waste for such a girl who looked at most 16 to be his concubine. The two lords ask you a few questions. You must answer truthfully, or see how I'll deal with you. Lu Yuanwei looked at the woman and said with a straight face. You shut up. Mingzu looked at Lu Yuanwei indifferently. The other party immediately smiled and tactfully closed his mouth. Do you know what happened here last night? Mingzu looked at her and asked casually. As soon as she finished speaking, Li Yi clearly saw a trace of panic on the woman's face. Although she quickly recovered, it was obviously impossible to escape the princess' eyes. You go out first. Mingzu pointed at Lu Yuanwei and said. Lu Yuanwei actually didn't want to go out, but the man who had just recorded put his hand on his shoulder. After a little bit of force, he obediently followed the man. The others also retreated to the door, not letting anyone near. Lu Yuanwei has already left. You can speak, Mingzu looked at her and said. Milords, you might be mistaken. I really don't know anything. The woman's face suddenly turned pale, but she still gritted her teeth and said. Li Yi smiled and said, I know you don't want to be Lu Yuanwei's concubine. If we can find you, we can naturally find the person from last night. If you can tell us the truth now, Li Yi pointed at Mingzu and said, this milord can help you and save you from here. You won't have to be Lu Yuanwei's concubine anymore. If there is someone you want to marry, it is not impossible for the government to be a matchmaker for you. When the woman heard the first half of Li Yi's words, a nervous expression appeared on her face. After listening to him finish, her eyes suddenly showed some hope and her expression changed. After a moment, she bit her lower lip as if she had made a decision. She raised her head to look at Li Yi and asked, Milord, is what you said true? Li Yi only smiled at her and didn't speak again. The woman's face showed hesitation again. When her eyes gradually became determined, she suddenly knelt down with a put-on sound. I am willing to speak. I only ask that Milord be lenient with him, leave 2 people behind to watch him. The rest of you, follow me. 2 people walked out of the room. Mingzu gave the order and strode out. Li Yi looked at Lu Yuanwei and unhurriedly followed. The status of the tiled houses and brothels in this world was similar to the entertainment squares and cinemas of the future. Of course, there were more services here. Most of them were rap and performing arts. All kinds of acrobatics were rarely seen in the future. These places were not rare here. Some of the more remote counties also had the existence of tiled houses, just on a smaller scale. The Jianghu artists gathered in the tile-roofed shop to show off their skills. They had different styles and styles. They set up different arenas in the tile-roofed shop, forming small circles. They used railings, ropes and curtains to separate them from each other. Each circle was a brothel. The tiled houses outside the city were simpler and more chaotic than the ones in the city. The tiled houses formed their own jianghu. Although it was difficult to manage because of the crowd, the government didn't like such places. However, places like the tiled houses and brothels were very popular among the people. Regardless of whether it was the commoners or the martial artists, they all liked to watch the bustle in such places. After Li Yi and Mingzu entered the tiled house, they followed the woman's instructions and walked towards the largest brothel. Because it was daytime, there weren't many people in the brothel. When they lifted the curtain and walked in, they immediately smelled a slightly pungent smell. They saw fireworks on the stage. A few masked men with disheveled hair were jumping on the stage. It seemed like they were doing a strange dance. The sound of gongs could be heard everywhere. It was very lively. It should be here. They walked straight to the back of the stage. Spectators were not allowed to enter the backstage. A few people in the brothel wanted to stop them but were blocked by the men. Behind the curtain, a young man was using a fan to fan the smoke from the burning gunpowder to the front of the stage. He heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, he saw a few strangers walking towards him. Shen Liang? The young man who was the leader asked tentatively. You are? The young man stood up with some doubts. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, two men walked over and pressed on his shoulders. The young man was just an ordinary Jianghu artist. After he brought her back, he didn't spend much effort and confessed everything in detail. The story was actually very cliché. There were two young men and women of lowly status who liked each other. They couldn't get married in the end. Lu Yuanwei, as the biggest villain in the story, used his status as the landlord to half-force the woman to be his concubine. As the lover, of course, the man wouldn't let it go. However, due to his status, he had no other way. He could only blow up the wall of Lu Yuanwei's house on the night of their wedding and set off a free firework to send his blessings to Lu Yuanwei. He didn't expect that he didn't choose the right place to blow it up. It happened to be next to the cow shed. The two cows didn't die from the explosion. They were scared to death by the sudden loud noise. Fortunately, Shen Liang didn't have the idea of mixing iron pieces with the gunpowder. Otherwise, the other cow wouldn't have survived. As for the gunpowder formula, it wasn't difficult to explain. The first 3 generations of the Shen family were all performers and pyrotechnics. They relied on this unique skill to make a living in the brothel, dealing with these things all day long. In the end, they were able to figure out some things after a few decades. Although it hadn't reached the most accurate proportion of the later generations, and there were many shortcomings in the craftsmanship, it was more than enough to blow up the wall. Shen Liang's father was killed by this kind of thing that was accidentally discovered. As the sole heir of the Shen family, Shen Liang had always treated it as a secret that could not be passed on. This time, Lu Yuanwei forced him into a corner. After doing such a thing in the dark, he hurriedly fled home. He didn't expect that after only half a day, the officials would come to the door. If Li Yi didn't guess wrong, he wouldn't be able to see Shen Liang and Yun Yang in the brothel in the future. And Lu Yuanwei's next wife would be his third concubine. Of course, with Her Royal Highness's style of doing things, the two of them would probably have a better life in the future. Although there would be a lack of personal freedom, they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. Compared to their previous life, this was already a very happy ending. It wasn't a coincidence that the other party could make a simple version of the bomb. If there was one, there would be a second and a third. Perhaps somewhere, someone had already discovered the mystery of the gunpowder. But this should be what Her Royal Highness needed to worry about. Looking at Her Royal Highness, who obviously had something on her mind, Li Yi's footsteps slightly quickened. He walked over and patted her shoulder. He said with a smile, "Why don't we discuss one more thing?" Chapter 242. Do you really think so? Li Emingzu looked at him with a complicated look in her eyes. Doubts, surprise, and a hint of understanding. All kinds of emotions were mixed together. She felt pity and puzzled that he had abandoned himself to live and wait for death despite his unparalleled talent. Li Yi's eyes were sincere. He nodded his head seriously and said, "Yes. Don't forget what you said just now." The princess was a little disappointed when she left, but Li Yi felt a lot more relaxed. Shen Liang was a talent. Although he was born in a humble family, his talent could not be buried no matter how lowly his status was. He invented Tian Fa, an important national weapon. It made the Jing kingdom, which was not very powerful, have another powerful weapon in the rise of other countries. Now that the Qi kingdom had invaded the Jing kingdom, the border was unstable, and the people had no way to make a living. However, this was only temporary. It would not be long before things would settle down again. The country called Qi would definitely have a taste of the power of the Jing kingdom's Tianfa. Before they could think of a way to break it, the two countries could live in peace and friendship for a long time and develop together. As for the name, Shen Liang, it would be remembered in history. He was the inventor of black gunpowder. The black clay pot with rusty metal pieces was used to reap the lives of the enemies on the battlefield. The era of cold weapons that lasted for thousands of years had experienced its first major turning point because of this name. As Li Yi was thinking about these things, he was accompanying Rui and the others on the street. After the four of them had a family meeting during dinner, they decided to move from Rui workshop to their new home. There was no other reason. In addition to the front of the Rui workshop, there were 2 bedrooms at the back. One was for Li Yi, and the other was for Rui, and Xiao Huan. It was fine for a few days, but after a long time, it would be very inconvenient to squeeze in. In comparison, the new house was much bigger. Other than the kitchen and the storage room, there were 3 bedrooms, and the area of the rooms was also bigger. Although it was still not enough for everyone to have their own room, it was much better than Rui Square. Today, they came out to buy some things for the house. The house was complete with large pieces of furniture, but there were still some small things that needed to be bought. The 4 of them strolled on the street for the whole afternoon and went back when it was time to cook. Li Yi carried a lot of things in his hands and decided that it would be better to go out with them less in the future. Second great uncle, who had moved to the opposite courtyard, was reluctant to part with the rocking chair, so he sent Fong and the others to the stockade village to bring it down. Li Yi also asked him to bring his own chair over. Uncle Han was old, and it took a lot of effort to make a chair, so it was better not to torture the old man. When Rui and Xiao Huan were cooking, Mingzu sent someone to summon Li Yi. This is what he used last night. Mingzu pointed to an item on the table in the courtyard and said. Shen Liang, who had just met not long ago, stood respectfully in the courtyard. In a short period of 2 days, his life had undergone a major change. He was extremely respectful to this noble person in front of him, who was obviously of high status. If not for her, he would still be doing odd jobs in the brothel, earning a few copper coins every day, just to fill his stomach. The girl he liked had become someone else's concubine, and he could only sigh at the moon every night. Li Yi lowered his head to take a look. It was a black jar. The mouth was sealed with mud, and a long lead was drawn out from the outside. From the outside, it did not look much different from the thing he had made. The only more obvious difference was that the jar used by the other party was slightly uglier. Li Yi had the experience of the predecessors, that was why he could make this thing effortlessly. But Shen Liang was different. In this era, to be able to find the best ratio of gunpowder, he must have gone through at least thousands of experiments, or maybe the hard work of a few generations. His understanding of gunpowder was much stronger than Li Yi's. Mingzu looked at him and asked doubtfully, the heaven's punishment, made according to the recipe, why is its power so much weaker than what you said? Maybe, you can try, crush it a little more, as much as you want, then find some eggs, pick out the egg white, don't want the egg yolk, use wooden chopsticks to mix it, let it condense into small granules, then use a bamboo sieve to sift it continuously, the size of mung bean or rice grain will do. Finally sift out the suitable size granules and put them into the jar to compact them. Li Yi looked at her and said, of course, this is only a suggestion, as for whether it will work or not, I cannot guarantee. Also, remember, this thing can't be exposed to open fire, not even a spark. When preparing, it's best not to have any ironware around. If this thing explodes, it'll be terrible. Also, remember, when it's raining, this thing can't be used. Li Yi pointed at Shen Liang and said, he should know quite a lot about these things. In the future, if he tries to explore more, the power should be able to increase a lot. I don't know much more. That's enough, dinner is almost ready, see you later. After saying that, he waved his hand casually and strode back. If there was no need, it was better to keep a distance from this thing. he did not want to be the Nobel Prize of this world. For things like gunpowder, it was best to avoid it as far as possible. It was absolutely right. Mingzu looked at Li Yi helplessly as he left like he was escaping, rubbed her eyebrows, then turned to look at Shenliang and asked, "What he said just now, did you remember it?" "I remembered it all," Shenliang nodded and said hurriedly. A few generations of his family had been developing this. He already knew a lot of things that the Lord said just now, but there were some things that he heard for the first time. At this moment, he silently remembered it in his heart, to slowly experiment in the future. When Li Xian walked in, he just happened to meet Li Yi walking out. He was about to raise his head to greet, but saw him waving his hand and walking straight past him. He scratched his head in confusion, and when he walked forward, Ming Zhu, who was standing there a moment ago, was nowhere to be seen. What's going on? Li Xian's face was full of confusion. Why did they all hide from him? When the guard of the imperial residence returned that day, he immediately reported the situation to him. Knowing that Li Yi's family was safe, he was no longer worried. He did not find Li Yi at Rui Lane, so he came over to ask Mingzu what exactly happened that night. But it was obvious that the two of them had just discussed something, but they did not want him to know, which made Li Xian a little confused. It was similar to the feeling when he was young in the palace. When the princes played, they never brought him along. He felt a little depressed and wronged. He knew Mingzu more than 10 years earlier than Li Yi, and he knew Li Yi long before Mingzu. Why now? The two of them were sticking to each other like glue, isolating him. Chapter 243. Li Yi did not intend to isolate Li Xian at all. It was much easier to deal with the stubborn Li Xian than with the princess. Gunpowder was too sensitive. Ordinary people were not allowed to touch it, not even the nobles other than the emperor. It was for his own good. The fewer people involved in this matter, the better. It was better for Li Xian to stay out of it. When he came back, the meal was ready. Xiao Huan was about to send a portion to second great uncle. Second great uncle was the oldest lonely old man in the village. No one had ever heard of him having a son or a daughter. In the past, all the families in the village took turns to send food to him every day. "I'll go. You go wash your hands and get ready for dinner." Li Yi saw that she was still wearing an apron. He picked up the wooden food box and walked to the opposite yard. The door was not closed. It was pushed open with a gentle push. Second great uncle was napping in the rocking chair in the yard as usual. Li Yi often saw him sitting on the chair at the door and basking in the sun. Occasionally, he would walk around the village with his walking stick and then come back to continue basking in the sun. Ever since he got the rocking chair, the frequency of second great uncle going out for a walk had decreased significantly. This divine artifact was put to good use by second great uncle. Young people should bask in the sun more often, and the elderly should even more so. This was a very good habit of his second granduncle. Li Yi often felt that as the oldest person in the stockade village, this might be one of the secrets of his long life. Second great uncle, bask in the sun for a while. Remember to eat. Li Yi put the food box on a stone stool. He patted second great uncle's shoulder gently and turned to walk out the door. On the rocking chair, the old man's half-closed eyes slowly opened. Just as Li Yi was about to walk out, a voice reached his ears. "Wait a minute." He turned his head and saw the old man struggling to get up from the chair. "Second great uncle, is there anything else?" Li Yi stood there and asked. He did not know what the old man wanted to say. Rui and the others were still waiting for him at home for dinner. Second granduncle raised his hand and waved at him. Although Li Yi was puzzled, he still walked over. "TSK, your body is still too weak." Second great uncle looked up at him and shook his head. Li Yi couldn't figure out the meaning behind his second great uncle's words. Did he call him over just to say that his body was weak? If one were to say who was weak, it should be him, right? While he was thinking about this, second great uncle had already straightened his body with the help of his walking stick. He patted his shoulder with his other hand. Li Yi didn't dodge. He knew that second great uncle liked to pat people's shoulders. Anyway, he wouldn't use much strength. The next moment, a huge force came from his shoulder. He almost lost his balance and fell to the ground. Remember this force in your body and slowly try to guide it. Although your aptitude is not good, as long as you practice hard, in a few years, you won't be bullied outside. Second great uncle murmured. He opened the food box, put the food on the stone bench, and ate leisurely. As he ate, he praised, Rui's cooking is still the best. All the girls should learn from her. Li Yi stood there in a daze. He felt that there was indeed a weak flow of air flowing slowly in his body. Although the flow of air was so subtle that it could be ignored, it was the first time in his 2 lives that he had such a wonderful feeling. Is this the legendary true qi? Li Yi couldn't hide the surprise on his face. Lu Rui had clearly told him that with his aptitude, he might be able to sense qi in a year or 2 if he practiced hard every day. But if he wanted to make greater progress, it was unlikely that he would be able to do so in this lifetime. Therefore, Li Yi's dream of becoming a peerless master and dominating the martial arts world had been put on hold for a long time. He didn't have too much hope. He thought that if he were to do dangerous things in the future, he could take her with him. Wouldn't everything be solved? However, comforting him was one thing. He finally had the possibility to realize his childhood dream, but the fire of hope that had just been ignited was ruthlessly extinguished by Mississippi Lu. How could he not be disappointed and depressed? At this moment, when he felt the flow of air, an unprecedented feeling of power filled his body. Li Yi couldn't help but feel a little excited. As the saying goes, old ginger is spicier. He couldn't wait to hug second great uncle's old face and kiss it a few times. But after looking down, he resisted the urge. At this moment, the old man seemed to think of something. He put down his chopsticks and said, although it's a shortcut, it seems that there are some disadvantages to doing this. What exactly is it? I can't remember. He waved his hand and said, forget it, let's not think about it. It's not a big deal. At most, I'll be possessed by the devil and be injured or disabled. There's no danger to my life. The smile on Li Yi's face froze. He had an urge to jump up and curse. What side effects? Why didn't he mention it before patting his shoulder? If he knew that this thing could cause people to be possessed by the devil and become disabled, he wouldn't have taken the risk no matter what. Why did he pat her without her permission? What if he damaged her? Of course, he wanted to become a master like Mississippi Lu, but it would be meaningless if a master was injured or disabled. At this moment, second great uncle patted his head and said, it doesn't seem that serious. Oh right, I remember now. Before achieving great success in martial arts, you must maintain your virginity. Otherwise, the day you lose your virginity will be the day you die. Is that so? Li Yi rushed out of the door and didn't dare to listen anymore. He was worried that this old man would scare him and give him a heart problem. He was also worried that he couldn't help but fight with him. It didn't matter whether he could beat him or not. If he listened to him for a while longer, he might die of anger. What's wrong, husband? Why are you in such a hurry? Li Yi hadn't come back after delivering food to second great uncle for a long time. Lu Rui was about to go and have a look. Before she could stand up and leave the room, she suddenly saw him rushing in and asked hurriedly. Li Yi was worried that what second great uncle said just now was true. If that was the case, he would be fooled by him. Therefore, he immediately described what he had just said. After listening to him, Lu Rui asked in surprise, husband, you already have the sense of qi? She grabbed Li Yi's hand. After a moment, a smile appeared on her face and she said, don't worry, husband. I've been practicing martial arts for a long time. Even without second great uncle, I'm afraid that I will have the sense of qi in a few months. Second great uncle just helped you shorten the time by a few months. In fact, she had thought of this before, but after all, she had just stepped into the supreme power realm. If she forced him to break through like this, she was afraid that it would be dangerous, so she had never mentioned it. Really? Li Yi breathed a sigh of relief. Rui's words were very credible. Lu Rui nodded with a smile. Then is second great uncle talking nonsense about not consummating the marriage before reaching the advanced kung fu? This was the question that Li Yi was most concerned about. Although this kind of kung fu exists, it is very rare in the whole martial arts world. Lu Rui looked at him and said, "The mental cultivation method that you practice will not affect you even if you consummate the marriage. You don't have to take second great uncle's words seriously." She was talking about the truth, but after she finished, she felt that the atmosphere in the room suddenly became a little strange when she said it. Xiao Huan's pretty face was red, and she just lowered her head to eat. Rui's expression was strange, and a faint blush could be seen on her face. She finally understood something, and her face was also a little red. After hearing Rui's explanation, Li Yi was finally relieved. Second great uncle was so disrespectful that he scared him so much. Next time when she sent him food, he would specially choose dishes that he didn't like. He walked to the dining table and sat down. He picked up the chopsticks, looked up and asked in confusion, "Xiao Huan, why are you blushing?" Then he turned to look at Lu Rui, who was still standing at the door, and said, "Why are you still standing there? Come and eat." Chapter 244. Li Yi was free again these 2 days. Her Royal Highness was busy with the heavenly punishment and hadn't bothered him for 2 days. Although he had the formula, the production method, and a professional's guidance, it wasn't something that could be done in a day or two. From the crudest form to the mature production, it still needed some time. Li Xian wasn't free either. He heard that his wedding date was approaching. Although as the crown prince, everything related to the wedding would be arranged by someone else, he was the one getting married. Prince Ning probably wouldn't allow him to wander outside all day. As for Wan Ruoqing, he only went to see her once. The progress was smooth. They were much more professional than him in matching that set. In a few days, they should be able to officially perform it and see the effect. These days, he didn't go to Rui workshop at all. Winter wasn't a good season to sell Rui Du. The cost of hard liquor wasn't small. As long as he relied on the profits sent by the prince's mansion, he could make money without doing anything. Perhaps it was because the prince's mansion did not lack this little bit of money, or perhaps it was because they disdained these commoners, or perhaps it was because of their relationship with the crown prince that they never did anything in business. Thus, this income had never been a problem. In general, he was in a good mood these days. In addition, he finally had a breakthrough in martial arts. The airflow in his body, which was thinner than a strand of hair, was played by Li Yi happily. He once tried to move the airflow to his hand. Although it didn't move when he chopped a table, it wasn't a problem for him to chop a thin board. He didn't want to become as powerful as Rui immediately, nor did he want to catch up with Mississippi Lu. Li Yi didn't want to compare himself with them. When he saw Fang coming in from outside, a flash of light suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. "Young master, what's wrong?" As soon as Fang came in, he saw Li Yi waving at him. He had some expectations in his heart and immediately walked over. He had been bored out of his mind at home for the past 2 days. His previous life had been very hard, and he couldn't even eat. He didn't even need to count how many copper coins he had at home, but he had been very busy every day. Although he didn't know what he was busy with, now, he didn't have to worry about food and clothing. He didn't even know how much money he had saved at home. He only saw his wife sitting on the bed after closing the door every night, lighting an oil lamp and counting copper coins. Fang really didn't know what his wife, who didn't know how to count, could count. In short, life was getting better and better, but he was getting more and more idle. In the past, he could greet people at Rui Square or go to the brothel with his son-in-law to watch plays. Now the shop was closed and his son-in-law didn't go to watch plays. Instead, he saw his son-in-law practicing boxing in the yard all day. Fang curled his lips. With his son-in-law's physique, it was useless no matter how much he practiced. This was the first time in a few days that the son-in-law had called him over. Fang was looking forward to having something to do. He couldn't continue idling around like this. "I've made some progress in martial arts these days. Why don't we have a match?" Li Yi stood up and looked at him. Fong's expression was a little stunned. After realizing that he didn't hear wrongly, he looked at Li Yi with a strange look and said, "Son-in-law, forget it. Even if I don't use my hands and feet, you are no match for me." When it came to writing poems and deceiving girls, Fong admitted that he was not as good as the son-in-law. When it came to making money, he was even worse. But when it came to fighting, Fong was very confident that even 10 son-in-law were not as good as him. Then don't use your hands and feet. Li Yi expressed his approval for Fong's proposal. Although he had made a lot of progress in the past 2 days, he wasn't that arrogant. He just said it casually and was waiting for Fong to say it. Fong didn't care about it. He stood still and said, "Son-in-law, come on." He didn't make much of a defensive posture at all. According to his estimation of Li Yi, even if he hit him with all his strength, as long as it didn't hit his vital parts, it would just be a tickle for him. "Watch my palm." Li Yi hit Fong's shoulder with his palm. Fong's body was steady and he didn't dodge. Bang! After a muffled sound, Fong's body staggered back a few steps and he sat on the ground. He sat there in a very inelegant posture. The expression on his face was extremely surprised and unbelievable. He rubbed his shoulder, which was a little numb. He looked at Li Yi and wondered if the person in front of him was really the son-in-law. Looking at Fong's expression as if he had seen a ghost, Li Yi had a deeper understanding of the role of genuine qi. The same palm, with and without genuine qi, had a very different effect. Although he could succeed just now because Fong looked down on him and didn't take any precautions, before that, even if Fong didn't take precautions, he couldn't have shaken him. In the past, Li Yi couldn't see the difference between him and Fong and Rui at all, because no matter which one he was, the gap was so big that he couldn't imagine it at all. Now, he finally saw a little hope. The undignified second uncle didn't talk seriously, but he was quite reliable. When walking on the street, Fong was still brooding about what had happened just now. How did the son-in-law become so powerful? He couldn't compare to his son-in-law in other aspects. It wasn't easy for him to find an area where he could compete with Li Yi. However, what happened just now had shaken his pitiful self-confidence. If he couldn't even beat the son-in-law in a fight in the future, how would he have the face to follow behind the son-in-law and protect him? No, he had been slacking recently. When he went back, he had to beg second uncle to teach him a few more moves. He couldn't lose to the son-in-law. Fong followed behind Li Yi absent-mindedly, thinking about something. Li Yi walked on the street with some fruits in his hand. There were no fresh fruits in winter, so they were all stored in cellars. But even if they weren't very fresh, they were still extremely expensive. Ordinary people couldn't even think about eating them. The grudge with the people from the forest of underworld seemed to have subsided, but when he went out, Fong would usually follow him just in case. This time, he was going to visit Dainyu. As a superior, if a subordinate was injured in the line of duty, he should visit. If it wasn't for the fact that the people from the forest of underworld injured Dainyu and gave him enough time to prepare, the situation would have been even worse. "Sir, Dainyu's house is in front." As they walked to the north district of Qing and prefecture, the accompanying bailiff pointed to a courtyard in front. When Li Yi was still outside the door, the bailiff hurriedly ran in and said in a loud voice, "Dainyu, the county lieutenant is here to see you." Not long after, a woman around 30 years old walked out of the house. Her clothes weren't luxurious, but they weren't very shabby either. Dainya's wife, "Quickly come and greet the county lieutenant." The bailiff walked in front of her and said, "Sir, sir." The woman clearly didn't have the experience of receiving such an important guest. Her expression was slightly flustered as she hurriedly bowed. Li Yi smiled kindly at her and walked into the house. He saw Dainyu struggling to sit up on the bed. "Quickly lie down." Li Yi strode over and pushed him back down. He placed the things in his hands on the table. There were 2 children in the house. The little girl looked to be around 10 years old while the boy was around 7 or 8. He didn't know how to greet people and just stared blankly at the fruits on the table and swallowed his saliva. Although the pears were wilted, they rarely ate seasonal fruits in the past. If it was winter, they wouldn't even think about it. "Sir, this he didn't think that the county lieutenant would come to see him and bring so many things. Daeniu was somewhat flattered. Seeing that he was about to get up again, Li Yi could only push him back down and said, "Your wound hasn't healed yet. Lie down and don't move." "How's the wound?" Li Yi looked at his wound. It was recovering well and there were no signs of ulceration or pus. There shouldn't be any big problems in the future. Daeniu lightly patted his chest and said, "This injury is nothing. After resting for half a month, I should be able to go back to work in the yamen. It's better for you to lie down at home." Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Recover first. After the new year, you can go back to the yamen. I'll apply for some subsidies from County Magistrate Lu. Just stay at home for the time being. Brother Daeniu, I've got the medicine for you." At this moment, a rough voice came from outside. A man walked in with a few packets of medicine in his hands. "County Lieutenant." Seeing the person in the house, Wu Er was stunned for a moment. Then, he immediately bowed respectfully. Dainiu's wife pushed away the little boy's hand that was reaching for the fruits and carried the two children out. Women and children shouldn't be involved in this kind of situation. Li Yi looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Why are you here?" After listening to Wu Er's explanation, Li Yi found out that it was Wu Er who went to find a doctor behind Dainiu's back and saved his life. After Daeniu woke up, he insisted on becoming sworn brothers with him. Wu Er saw that Daeniu was so forthright and they had similar interests, so he agreed. These few days, Daeniu had been resting in bed. It was inconvenient for a woman to manage the house alone. As a brother, Wu Er would help whenever he could. He had just gone to the medicine store to buy medicine for Wu Er and met Li Yi here when he came back. Wu Er came at the right time. Li Yi was actually planning to look for him. After giving Daeniu a few words of encouragement, Li Yi left Dainiu's house with Fang and Wu Er. "Are you very familiar with the Jianghu?" Li Yi looked at Wu Er and asked. Wu Er nodded and said, "My elder brother often goes out as a bodyguard and can be considered a Jianghu person. Sometimes, I also go out with my elder brother, so I'm not unfamiliar with the Jianghu." A smile appeared on Li Yi's face. He looked at Wu Er and said, "Senior Han and Officer Zhao that you mentioned last time, tell me more about them." Seeing the smile on his son-in-law's face, Fang could not help but shiver. He inexplicably felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. Someone is going to be unlucky again. The person in front of him was not only the county lieutenant but also Wu Er's benefactor. Naturally, he would tell him everything he knew. In fact, since a few days ago, when he came out of the medicine store, Wu Er had been thinking about the whole thing. These few days, he specially inquired about the whole thing. Of course, he did not find out that the woman in the Willow Leaf village was the county lieutenant's wife. He only faintly guessed that the county lieutenant should have an unusual relationship with her. He immediately sorted out his thoughts and then said, "Senior Han's real name is Han Dazhong. He has been famous for a long time and is not weak. In the Jianghu, whether it is the underworld tyrants or the righteous swordsmen, they all respect him and call him Senior Han. I heard that when he was young, he was also a ruthless character and had an illustrious reputation in the Jianghu. Later, he retired from the Jianghu and took in many disciples. He started a bodyguard and goods business. These years, he has grown stronger and his power is not to be underestimated. I also heard that Senior Han has married many concubines over the years, but he has never had a child. There are rumors that he has some problems in that area, but I don't know if it is true or not." Wu Er obviously spent a lot of time in this area. He was very familiar with Senior Han's past and even talked about some uncertain rumors in the Jianghu. As for Officer Zhao, not many people in the Qing and prefecture have heard of him, but he is very famous in Chuzhou. His family's wealth is more than 1 million. I heard that he is a generous person and often invites the underworld tyrants in Chuzhou to feasts. He has made a lot of friends. These years, his business has become bigger and bigger. I am afraid that he has used a lot of dirty tricks. Anhe County was under the jurisdiction of the Qing and prefecture. It was located at the border between the Qing and prefecture and Chuzhou. In Anha County, many people might not have heard of the Anha County magistrate, but when it came to the Four Seas escort agency, even a child would know about it. After all, although the county magistrate was an official, he was still an outsider. The Han family's Four Seas escort agency had been operating in Anha County for nearly 20 years and had long become a local tyrant. Even the county magistrate had to be courteous when he met the master of the Han family. After all, without the Han family support, it would undoubtedly be much more difficult for the county magistrate to carry out his orders in Anha County. In the main residence of the Han clan in Anha County, when a young man in his 20s walked into the central hall, a man in his 50s with gray hair on both sides of his temples and a sharp gaze was sitting in the hall. He appeared to be quite spirited. The man in the hall was the master of the Han family, Han Dazhong. He had single-handedly founded the Four Seas escort agency and had a high status in the Jianghu. Most people in the Jianghu had to respectfully address him as Senior Han when they saw him. The young man walked to the front of the hall and cupped his hands respectfully. Master, it has been confirmed that Zhu Tufu, Cui Yan, and the others are all dead. To kill Cui Yan and the others, they must have paid a huge price. I didn't expect that the government would go to this extent for that woman. The master of the Han family's face was gloomy as he said, to encircle them, they must have mobilized the troops stationed in the city. That woman has such power, forget it, forget it. It's not good to have another conflict with her. I can only avenge my son in the future. The master of the Han family waved his hand and said, spread the word that what happened before was a misunderstanding between me and that woman. Tell them not to have any designs on that woman. Yes, master. I will go immediately. The young man slowly retreated after saying that. However, he did not think that there was any need to make an announcement. Dozens of heroes of the Jianghu had been defeated by that woman. Who would have the guts to cause trouble for her? Chapter 245. Chuzhou, Xiang City. It was night, deep in the Zhao Manor, on the spacious square. There was a hubbub of voices and bright lights. Chuzhou's minister Zhao was kind and generous. He saw money as dirt. In Chuzhou's Jianghu, there were many people who had received his kindness. Minister Zhao had many friends. Not only did he often invite these Jianghu people to dinner, he would also generously help any hero who had no money to travel in Jianghu. He never mentioned the word return. In the eyes of these Jianghu people, this was a sign of great righteousness. Many people recognized him as a friend. Speaking of which, it was strange. Although they spent a lot of money every day, the Zhao family's business was getting better and bigger. Those who didn't know would probably sigh at Squire Zhao's business skills, but those who really knew the inside story would mostly spit on him and disdain his dirty tricks behind the scenes. At this time, deep in the Zhao Manor, a dozen Jianghu men were talking and laughing, drinking to their heart's content. From time to time, the servants of the Zhao family would serve them good wine and food. Surrounded by the crowd was a man with a goatee and a shrewd face. The man had a pair of triangular eyes and wore a minister's uniform. He didn't look outstanding. Even though he didn't dare say he was the best in Chuzhou, in Xiang City, no matter if it was a Jianghu person or a government official, who didn't know this was the good benefactor, Minister Zhao? Brother Zhao, it's my fault this time. I couldn't do my job well for you. I'll drink to punish myself. I hope you won't blame me. It's a cold night, but there's a man wearing only a short-sleeved shirt, the muscles on his arms bulging. He cupped his hands towards Zhao Yuanwei, picked up a bowl of wine in front of him, and drained it in one gulp. Minister Zhao's face was full of guilt. He said, Brother Qin, don't say any more. It's my fault. I didn't know that woman was so strong. Even Zhu Tufu and the others died there. If I knew she was so hard to deal with, I wouldn't have let you take the risk. He didn't act pretentious and filled the bowl in front of him to the brim. He looked at the crowd and said, This bowl of wine is my apology to you brothers. Please promise me that you won't cause trouble for that woman anymore. If anything happens to you, I won't be able to rest easy. Everyone immediately raised their bowls to show their sincerity. They would no longer put themselves in danger, but if that woman came to bully them, they would not just stand by and watch. They would definitely lend their brother a hand. Zhao Yuan was embarrassed on the outside, but he was finally relieved. After all, this was the territory of Chuzhou City. No matter how powerful the woman was, she couldn't be the enemy of all the Jianghu men in Chuzhou City. Wu Er followed Li Yi all the way back home. They talked in the room for a long time before leaving. When he left, he still had a puzzled look on his face. His puzzlement stemmed from the task that the county commandant had just given him. However, it was only a slight effort. Since he couldn't figure out the county commandant's intention, he didn't need to think about it anymore. He just needed to do as he was told, Senior Han, Squire Zhao. Li Yi muttered these two names as he walked out of the room. These few days, he finally had some free time. If there was a grudge, there was a grudge, there was a grudge. Xiao Huan was washing clothes in the yard. Li Yi had just changed out of them this morning. Although the weather was good, the temperature of the water was very low. The young maidservant rubbed her hands a few times and blew on them twice. When Li Yi walked closer, he saw that her hands had turned blue from the cold. Don't wash them, don't wash them. Why don't you add some hot water before washing them? Li Yi's heart ached as he held her hands. Her hands were so cold that even Li Yi couldn't stand it. Young master, it's okay. It will be done in a while. The servant girl's heart was filled with joy as her hands were no longer cold. However, her face was red. Li Yi reached out his hand and tapped her head. He said, "Listen to young master and go back to your room to warm up. It won't be good if you get frostbite." When Li Yi was young, he had frostbite every year. It was painful and itchy. His hands were swollen like steamed buns. He had to be fed by his mother spoon by spoon. Later, he met an old Chinese medicine doctor who gave him a folk prescription. After that, he never had it again. However, he didn't want to relive that feeling in his life. Xiao Huan was chased into the room to warm herself by the fire. If her slender and white hands got frostbite, he couldn't bear it. He reached out to test the water temperature in the basin. He couldn't help shivering and immediately put his hands back. Thinking that Xiao Huan washed clothes in such a temperature every day, his heart was even more distressed. The silly girl didn't even bear to use hot water. He didn't know how she survived the previous winter. Enduring the cold water and rubbing the clothes, he thought that the temperature had dropped a bit these days. It was still a bit cold to sleep with 2 blankets at night. It was time to think of a way to improve her living environment. After rubbing the clothes and washing them, his hands were too cold. After a while, he took them out of the water and wrung them out to dry in the courtyard. Looking out through the courtyard gate, old Fang and a few other men were squatting under a tree, talking about something with their saliva flying everywhere. These days, Fang had complained to him more than once that he was almost bored out of his mind. It seemed that he had to find some work for him to do to satisfy his requirements. Under a big tree not far from the door, Fang was telling the men the story of the return of the Condor heroes. When the son-in-law was telling this story to the second miss, he had heard a few parts of it. Since he had nothing to do, he showed off in front of the men. Of course, although he was talking with his saliva flying, the story had no beginning or end. It was almost not attractive. If it wasn't for the fact that they had nothing to do, no one was willing to see him talking here. Fang saw that everyone was bored to death. 2 of them even dozed off. He couldn't help but feel annoyed. They were both telling stories. Why could the son-in-law do it but he couldn't? He was determined to compete with the son-in-law. With a turn of his eyes, the story immediately changed. Through the door, the man heard a rustling sound in the next room, mixed with the sound of water and a woman's thin moaning. The sound was getting louder. Then he heard the creaking of the bed and a man's heavy breathing. When this wonderful story was told, the crowd immediately became excited. The 2 men who were about to doze off stopped immediately. As if they had been injected with chicken blood, they stretched their necks and waited for old Fong to continue. The other men were not calm either. Their distracted attention was pulled back to the conversation. They were all illiterate men. Usually, they told dirty jokes in extremely vulgar language. Fong and Li Yi had stayed in the brothel for a long time and learned a few tricks from the old storyteller. In an instant, these men's breathing became heavy. Fong couldn't hide the complacency on his face. A bunch of idiots. He only used a little bit of skill to make them so excited. They were really country bumpkins who had never seen the world. But he didn't stop talking. He continued. The man was excited and put his ear to the door. He only heard a creaking sound. Who knew that the door wasn't closed tightly? It was suddenly opened by the man. The man was stunned and saw inside the room. When old Fong said that, he stopped. The few men were just getting excited and their ears turned red. They hurriedly urged, "What's wrong with seeing the house? Hurry up and tell us." I saw a man sitting on the bed in the room. A woman was washing his feet on the ground. Her movements were fast and the sound of water splashing. Fong's face turned serious. He stood up and looked at Li Yi, who was standing behind the men and looking at him with his hands folded. He said with a smile, "Son-in-law, why are you here?" Chapter 246. It seemed that old Fong really had a lot of free time. A few months ago, he was still a rather shy man. When he talked about his beautiful wives, beautiful concubines, and big mansions, he would blush from time to time. Now, he was so free that he could tell dirty jokes in public. His mouth already had some of old Sun's kung fu. Now that the son-in-law had arrived, the crowd was too embarrassed to continue listening. They chuckled and scattered like birds and beasts, thinking to themselves that they had to pick a good time to call old Fong out for a chat. "Son-in-law, what's the matter?" Fong looked serious and became an upright man again. Li Yi nodded. There was indeed something. Even if there was nothing, he had to find something for him to do. How could such a good person be so free? Fong and a few men went up the mountain to cut bamboo. Although they didn't know why the son-in-law asked them to cut bamboo, it was much more interesting than staying at home and telling dirty jokes. Li Yi went to the street with Rui. Since Fong wasn't there, Rui temporarily acted as his bodyguard. Other people were the personal bodyguards of beautiful presidents, but she was the bodyguard of the county lieutenant's beautiful sister-in-law. She had a face that people didn't dare to get close to. Before people got close, she would cast a cold glance at them and they wouldn't dare to get close anymore. In the future, she would definitely be like an iceberg president. With her by his side, he would be as safe as he could be. Of course, those who wanted to get close were mostly men, and their target wasn't Li Yi. "May I ask what this is, young master?" In a shop that specialized in red clay stoves, the old craftsman moved closer and looked at a few pieces of paper on the table. There were a bunch of pictures on the paper, and the old craftsman didn't understand them. The red clay stove that they used to eat hot pot at home was bought here. The old craftsman's skills were good. After using it for so long, there hadn't been any quality problems. When he planned to make a honeycomb briquette stove, he immediately thought of this place. In the winter, it was necessary to have a good stove. Li Yi planned to make a few more stoves and put one in every room. It was convenient to use water, and they wouldn't feel cold when they slept at night. This picture is from the front, this picture is from the top, and this picture is what it looks like from the inside. After spending a few minutes to teach the old craftsman how to look at the three-dimensional and cross-sectional views, the old man's eyes lit up and he was full of praises. "This is a good idea, this is a good idea." The old craftsman had worked his whole life and was very experienced. Soon, he could read the picture correctly. A few simple blueprints appeared in his mind as he looked at them from top to bottom, left to right. Although the drawing on the paper looked a little different from the stove in the shop, it was definitely a stove. The old man looked away from the drawing and said, "Young master, you want a stove, right? There are so many in the shop, big and small. You can choose one, there is no need to remake it." Li Yi smiled and said, my stove has some special uses. I'll make it according to this diagram. There shouldn't be a problem, right? The old craftsman was puzzled. Apart from cooking tea, what other special uses did the stove have? Besides, the drawing on the paper only seemed to have an extra ear compared to a normal stove. But since it was a customer's request, he didn't need to ask too much. No problem, it will be done by tomorrow. Where is your residence? I will send someone to deliver it. After discussing the price with the old craftsman, Li Yi and Rui walked out of the shop. Now that they had a stove, they would find a way to get some honeycomb briquettes to make it warmer this winter. Fong and the others quickly came back with chopped pillars. Each of them carried a bundle on their shoulders. According to Li Yi's instructions, they opened the joints in the bamboo so that they could see from one side to the other. Fong resisted the urge to ask Li Yi what it was for. It would make him look ignorant if he asked too much. He would see it with his own eyes one day. The old craftsman was very fast. The apprentices in the shop loosened the things the next day. Because this young master had given them a lot of money, the few of them had to work for an entire night before they could finish it before dawn. Fong saw his son-in-law put the hollowed bamboo on the ear of the stove. He connected another section and made a hole in the window. The other end of the bamboo stretched out from the hole. The charcoal fire burned quickly. After a while, the room became warmer. More importantly, Fong stayed in the room for a long time, but he didn't feel dizzy or smell the charcoal. They also had a stove at home, but they only used it when eating hot pot. When they ate, they had to open the window and the door. Otherwise, they would feel dizzy after a long time, and their body would not have any strength. Zhu Zi had been complaining about the cold at home for the past 2 days. It was not enough to cover 2 quilts at night. He was annoyed by it. When he came out just now, he even kicked his butt. This child only lived a good life for a few days, but he had already forgotten all the hardships he had suffered before. In the winter of the past few years, how could there be 2 quilts for him to cover himself? The weather in the mountains was much colder than in the city, but didn't he still survive? Of course, he didn't dare to light the stove in the house at night. That thing couldn't be used at night. Every winter, there would be people who lit the stove and quietly died in their house. After falling asleep, they never woke up again. After staying in the room for a while, he felt that it was getting warmer and warmer. After he didn't feel any discomfort, he ran outside. There was still quite a lot of bamboo left, so he decided to go cut some more and make something like this for his own house. He knew the shop assistants who had just delivered the stove. He had bought a stove from that shop before, so he would go to their shop later and ask them to make one that was exactly the same as his son-in-law's. It was his own child. It was fine to kick him, but it was also distressing for him to keep freezing. With this thing, if this brat still complained of being cold, he would have to kick him again. Son-in-law, the room is much warmer. Xiao Huan no longer rubbed her hands. The copper pot on the stove was steaming, and the water inside was always hot. Son-in-law said that he would use this water to wash his face and wash his clothes in the future. The room became warmer, and he wouldn't feel cold in eldest Miss' arms when he slept at night. Thinking of these things, her eyes narrowed into a crescent. In the entire prefectural city, only her house had this thing. Son-in-law's ability was really great. This damn weather, it snows just like that. It's so cold. Late at night, the cold wind whistled in the mountains. A few figures pushed open the door of the abandoned temple in the mountains. They shook off the snow on their shoulders. The cold wind mixed with the snow poured in from the outside. They hurriedly turned back and closed the door again. In an instant, their bodies felt a lot warmer. The space inside the small temple in the mountains wasn't big, but it was still enough to accommodate dozens of people. The windows on both sides had long been blocked with wooden planks. The snowstorm outside was like a different world compared to the inside of the house. In the middle of the house, someone had lit a bonfire to keep warm. They weren't the only group of people in the temple. Whether it was the wanderers of the Jianghu, the escorts escorting goods, or the pedestrians hurrying through the night, they were all blocked by this sudden snowstorm. If you're cold, come over and warm yourself up. There were many people around the bonfire. They had originally wanted to find a corner to sit down, but someone said aloud, "Thanks." The people of the Jianghu had always been forthright. They didn't refuse and sat down in the seats that the other person had opened up. After sitting down, one of the men untied a water pouch from his back and handed it over. "Do you want to drink some?" The person opposite them was about to wave his hand to refuse when the man opened the water pouch. A strong aroma wafted out. He was stunned for a moment before taking the water pouch. He tilted his head back and drank a mouthful. He smiled and said, "Good wine." "Huh, this is Qing and Prefecture's famous strong wine. It's just that it's too damn expensive," the man said with a smile. "Brothers from the prefectural city?" the man asked with a smile. The man nodded and said, "That's right. We were planning to go to Chuzhou City to run some errands. We didn't expect the snow to come so suddenly. We'll have to leave tomorrow." The man opposite them also introduced himself. He was also from the Qing and Prefecture. He was in the business of escorting goods. Because of the snowstorm, he had to rest here for the night. They were all people of the Jianghu. After a short conversation, the atmosphere became lively. Chapter 247. For these people who often traveled the Jianghu, they were all brothers within the 4 seas. Most of them were forthright. After all, everyone had their fair share of difficulties. It was necessary to make friends. The fire was burning brightly. Someone brought some firewood from the corner and added it. The temperature in the room rose a few degrees. The Jianghu people talked about the Jianghu. After a few sips of strong alcohol to warm themselves up, they started to talk. "It's not easy to transport goods on a snowy day. Where are you going, Brother Wu?" The man took a few sips and sealed the pouch. This thing was expensive. If it weren't for the fact that he got along well with Brother Wu, he wouldn't have taken it out. After the short conversation just now, he already knew that the brother opposite him was called Wuda, and that he worked as an escort to transport goods for a living. Tonight, he was also delayed by the sudden snowstorm on the road. "Chuzhou," Wu said with a smile. "Not far." The man continued to talk about this topic. Although the escort business was arduous and had a certain amount of risk, compared to other jobs, the rewards were still very considerable. It's just enough to make ends meet." Wu laughed and said, "It's just to make a living. The 4 Seas escort agency has taken all the big jobs. We can only pick up the ones they don't want. We don't make much money on a single trip." The Han family's 4 Seas escort agency was famous in Qing and Prefecture, and this man often heard of it. Thinking of a rumor he had heard a few days ago, he asked in confusion, "I heard that Senior Han of the 4 Seas escort agency issued a must-kill order against a woman a few days ago." Many people from the Green Forest wanted to establish a relationship with the Han family and go kill that woman. In the end, they were all killed. "What's Senior Han? He's just a eunuch." A sarcastic voice came from beside Wuda. The man looked at the speaker and asked, "Eunuch? May I ask this brother, what do you mean by that?" The man looked at the man and was also surprised. "Have you not heard of the 72 evil warding swordplay of the Han family?" The man shook his head. He had never heard of the evil warding swordplay. "I'd like to hear more." The man cupped his hands and said, "The people of the martial arts world had a natural talent for gossip. Senior Han was quite famous in the martial arts world. Although there were some interesting anecdotes, they were far less explosive than what the person in front of him said." The man faintly felt that he was about to hear a secret that few people knew about. It was boring sitting there by the fire. Since there was nothing to do, the man slowly said, "The story starts from 20 years ago." She didn't know why, but she still felt a little cold last night, even though she had lit the stove yesterday and the room was much warmer. Li Yi woke up from the cold early in the morning. When he was putting on his clothes, he felt the cold wind blowing in the room. He glanced at the window and found that the opposite window was half open. He must have forgotten to close it when he slept last night. After a night, the stove must have gone out. Li Yi ran over to close the window. When he looked out, all he could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. It was snowing. He wasn't in a hurry to close the window. This snow came suddenly. Although the snowflakes floating in the sky were small, judging from the thick snow on the ground, he could imagine how heavy the snow was last night. The cold wind blew in from outside and immediately woke him up a lot. At this time, he didn't feel so cold. It was not the first time he saw snow. As a native northerner, he experienced such heavy snow several times every winter. At that time, he was still in the countryside. When he got up early in the morning, the mountains and fields were all the same color. Early in the morning, he and his friends went up the mountain with the dog at home to chase rabbits and pick up pheasants. The snow was thick and the rabbits couldn't run fast. The pheasants stuck their butts in the snow and didn't come out. Catching them was as easy as pulling carrots. Of course, in this world, it was the first time he saw snow, so he had a different feeling. He got up very early today. Rui and Xiao Huan hadn't left the room yet. He walked over and opened the door of the courtyard. Fong was sweeping the snow with a big broom. "Good morning, young master." Fong greeted Li Yi. His movements didn't slow down at all. He pushed forward like a human road sweeper. In his field of vision, many people were already busy. They had gotten used to waking up early all their lives. Other than naughty children, not many people would sleep even in winter. Li Yi turned around and saw the only set of footprints he had left in the courtyard. He felt very accomplished. This was a hobby he had since he was young. Every time he saw his own footprints in the white snow, he would feel happy for no reason. He grabbed a handful of snow from the ground and rolled it into a ball. He wanted to experience the feeling of snowball fights when he was young. At this time, a door in the courtyard opened. Seeing the figure walking out of the room, Li Yi threw the ball of snow out subconsciously. Bang! Lu Rui waved her sleeve and the ball of snow exploded in the air and scattered. Looking at Mississippi Lu's eyes that were full of fighting spirit, Li Yi ran out of the door subconsciously. He forgot to think before he threw the ball of snow. Was Mississippi Lu someone he could provoke? A few snowballs flew from behind and landed on his neck. Li Yi shuddered and sped up. Although Mississippi Lu didn't chase after him, Li Yi still planned to take a look outside before going back. Most people were sweeping the snow on the road. Not only in front of their house, but all the snow in their houses was swept to the roadside. A few naughty children who woke up early were already high. Snowballs flew everywhere. They didn't get angry even when they hit their heads. They grabbed a handful of snow from the roadside and threw it back. Not long after, their clothes were wet from the inside out. They stood by the roadside and shivered like a sieve. If he was seen by the adults, they would kick him a few times and drag him back home by the ear. He had to quickly change into a set of dry clothes. If he caught a cold, the cost of medicine was a small matter. If he were to fall ill, he would suffer for the rest of his life. After a few cries, the naughty children could not be seen outside. Li Yi strolled around and returned to his house. The snow in the courtyard had been swept into a pile. Xiao Huan was squatting on the ground and making a snowman. Mississippi Lu's snowman was already done. Li Yi took a while to distinguish it and vaguely recognized a human shape. Li Yi laughed. Under Mississippi Lu's unfriendly gaze, he took a few wooden shovels from the kitchen and walked to another pile of snow on the opposite side. He patted the pile of snow twice and made a rough shape. Then, he used the shovel to mend it. Some of the smaller parts were handled with his fingers. After a while, the shape of a woman appeared. Xiao Huan's snowman was already done. After looking at her son-in-law, she blushed and pushed down the snowman that she had painstakingly made. She ran to stand behind Li Yi and poked her head out to take a look. Rui Lu took a look and kicked her snowman away. A hint of anger appeared on her pretty face. Everything was afraid of comparison. Li Yi's was a real snowman. Hers was at most a pile of snow. Actually, she was wrong this time. A snowman should look like a snowman. A small head, a big belly, and a broom would be its arm. What Li Yi was making now was a snow sculpture. The artistic cells that he lacked in his previous life were all made up in this life. There were a lot of books on ice and snow sculpture in the library. After digesting a few books, making this thing was like drawing and writing. It was full of skill points and not difficult. In less than an hour, a snow sculpture that was half the height of a person was made. Time was limited and many details could not be perfect. However, it was the first time that Xiao Huan and Lu Rui saw someone who could make such a lifelike figure with snow. The woman stood there with a sword in her hand. Even the expression on her face could be seen clearly. She was like a miniature version of Second Mississippi. Xiao Huan looked at Second Miss and was a little envious. It would be great if her son-in-law could make a Xiao Huan. Of course, it would be even better if he could make a Big Miss. Lu Rui was no longer angry. Putting aside his intentions, she liked this snowman very much. Li Yi was also very satisfied with his work. After all, it was his first time making it. This level was already very good. After looking up and down for a while, he suddenly smashed the snow sculpture with his palm. It was like spending half a day building a house with more than 1,000 pieces of building blocks. After building it, he destroyed it with his own hands. For people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, the feeling in their hearts at that moment was extremely comfortable. The only thing that was not right was that after he smashed the snow sculpture, the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a little. Chapter 248. Fong walked out of the house gloomily and wiped his face. There was only a little bit of ash on his face, but it was immediately smeared evenly. His skin, which was not very fair, became 3 shades darker. Last night's snowfall was too sudden. Not to mention the pillars, even he himself was freezing. Fortunately, the craftsman had brought the stove over. He wanted to install it immediately. Once the charcoal fire was lit, the house would be warm immediately. In the end, he hugged the 2 bamboos and pieced them together for a long time, but he still couldn't make it like the son-in-law's house. In a rage, he kicked the stove. The stove overturned and the charcoal fell to the ground. It almost burned the pillar next to him. He was chased out by his wife with a broom. He shook his head. It seemed that this kind of detailed work was really not something he could do. He planned to go to the son-in-law's house and ask him how to do it. Before he entered the courtyard, a figure rushed out from inside and disappeared in front of his eyes in the blink of an eye. It was really a whoosh. The speed was incredibly fast. Fong was stunned for a while before he recovered. The expression on his face was still a little unbelievable. Just now, was the son-in-law? After getting the answer from Xiao Huan, Fong's heart was hurt a lot. He didn't know when it started, but the son-in-law was becoming more and more powerful. Fong felt that his role was constantly decreasing. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before he could only help cut the bamboo and run errands. Apart from the son-in-law, he received the most dividends from the outside business. Even if he stayed at home every day, he could still earn money that he couldn't earn in a year. Although it felt good to be rich, he didn't feel at ease taking the money. Seeing that her man came back from the son-in-law's house and quietly fiddled with the stove, Lucia originally wanted to mutter a few words, but she swallowed them. Although she didn't scold him often, and when necessary, she would use the broom to make him remember. But she knew how to behave. After so many years, she knew when to speak and when to shut up. She wouldn't ask too much about the things between men. At this moment, she could only sigh and silently clean up the charcoal pile on the ground. Li Yi ran from home to the street in one breath, gasping for breath. When he looked back and saw that no one was chasing him, he found a roadside stall and sat down to rest. He didn't know if it was because of the pat from his second great-uncle, but his old injuries were almost healed. His lower abdomen didn't hurt anymore, and he felt that his body was in a better condition than before he was injured. Of course, due to the fact that he had successfully cultivated his true chi, he seemed to have been a little complacent these 2 days. He had been too cocky in front of Mississippi Lou. He rubbed the part of his butt that was still faintly aching, and finally realized how big the gap between him and Rui was. There was still a long way for him to go if he wanted to turn over the situation and suppress second Miss Lou in a fair and square manner. At the moment, he still had to follow the principle of keeping a low profile. The next time he wanted to vent his anger, he would have to pick a time when she was not at home and secretly make a snow sculpture to smash. Today was indeed a little too ostentatious. He couldn't return home for the time being. Otherwise, he might end up like the snow sculpture just now, so he decided to take a stroll on the street. It snowed heavily last night, but there wasn't much snow on the main roads of the prefectural city. There was no need for the officials to supervise. Before the sun rose, people started to get up and sweep the snow in front of their houses to the roadside. The shops were even more active. After all, they still had to do business on a snowy day. Life wasn't easy, and one less day of business meant one more day of loss. At this moment, there were no more snowflakes falling from the sky, and there were fewer people on the streets than usual. In such cold weather, the best choice was to stay at home and not go out. He passed by the place that sold breakfast and bought 2 steaming hot steamed buns. The steamed buns here were said to have been sold for decades. The skin was thin and the filling was plentiful. The taste was also passable. After eating the 2 steamed buns, he no longer felt hungry. There weren't many people in the shops along the way, but there were a few customers in the taverns. They were the only taverns in the prefectural city that sold hard liquor. The boss behind them was Prince Ningfu, and it was the source of more than 90% of the family's income. As he strolled into a tiled house. No matter what time it was, there was no lack of people here. There were tea houses, taverns, brothels, and customers coming in and out. It was very lively. A few temporary brothels had collapsed under the weight of the heavy snow. The performers who relied on the brothels to make a living were cleaning up the scene. It seemed that they hadn't put much effort into building the sheds. Although they weren't sturdy, they weren't so fragile. The larger brothels didn't have this problem. When Li Yi pushed open the door and walked in, the storyteller old man's son was directing the people to rehearse Painted Skin. It would be performed in 2 days, and it was related to whether or not they would be able to eat in the future. They had to get out of bed before the sun rose, and they couldn't go back until very late. However, no one had any complaints. "Young master, you're here. Miss Wan isn't here right now. I'll go get her immediately." Old man's son saw Li Yi and immediately ran over, smiling. After reading the follow-up storybook, his attitude towards Li Yi became even better. No need, no need. Li Yi waved his hand. He just came to have a look on the way. The old man seemed to think of something. He took out a small cloth bag from his bosom, which looked bulging and heavy. He said, "Young master, take this money. I asked some old friends to tell the Jianghu story you told last time. As expected, it's very popular among the Jianghu people. They sent this money here yesterday." Li Yi waved his hand again and said, "Give the money to Miss Wan. The brothels will open again, and the expenses will definitely be a lot. You keep this money." Hearing this, old man's son didn't say anything more. They really needed a lot of money these days. Old man's son was puzzled that Li Yi asked him to spread the good story through his friends, who were also storytellers. Most people in Jianghu were generous. Most of them gathered in the brothels outside the city. They were generous and liked to hear about the Jianghu. They would not be stingy with money when they heard it. It was a pity that they didn't keep a good story for themselves. At least they could exchange it for some money. It was a pity that Li gave it away for nothing. It was all money. Old man's son couldn't figure out Li Yi's intention, so he didn't think about it. It was not something he should worry about. He sent him out of the brothels and went back to urge those people to hurry up and rehearse. Hey, old man, go on. What is the 72 evil warding swordsmanship exactly? In a temporary shack at the foot of the city wall, a man threw a small piece of silver into the jar in front of him and urged. The shack was not big, but there were many people inside. Most of them looked travel-worn. It was obvious that they were people who often traveled outside. After the man urged him to continue, the rest of the people also urged the old man to continue speaking with interest. Although the old man was old, he still had some eyesight. When he saw a flash of silver light into the jar, the wrinkles on his face bloomed like chrysanthemums. He cleared his throat and continued. The 72 evil warding swordsmanship of the Han family is really amazing. It is a legendary first-class swordsmanship, but few people know about it. First, this swordsmanship is never taught to outsiders. Second, the swordsmanship is fast and strange. No one outside knows the name of the swordsmanship. They only know that the swordsmanship is extremely fast and has reached an unimaginable level. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.